You're on.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to our Latino Caucus information briefing on comprehensive immigration reform. I'd like to thank all of you for being here and thank all the presenters who will be giving us some great information today.
It's very informal.
It's an informal informational hearing. We're all amigos here. So, good afternoon, friends and esteemed colleagues. It's great to be here as chair of the California Latino Legislative Caucus. I'd like to welcome all of you to our informational briefing on comprehensive immigration reform. We have convened a great group of community advocates, business leaders, and policy experts to receive updates on the status of comprehensive immigration reform at a federal level, to hear a historical narrative on immigration reform as well, and to provide a forum for community members to voice concerns and comments. It is an important time for our immigrant population, and I'd like to thank all of you for your hard work and persistence on one of the most important policy issues facing our time. At the state level, we have been moving forward with good public policy that seeks to wholly integrate our immigrant community into our society and bring them out of the shadows. This year, we have several bills working and moving through the legislature that would directly impact immigrants, including AB 60 by Assembler Luis Alejo that would allow undocumented drivers to obtain a driver's license if they meet certain requirements, and my SB 23 that would establish a task force within the governor's office to provide recommendations on immigrant integration, implementation of federal immigration reform, and the establishment of an Office of New Americans. Despite being home to approximately 10 million immigrants, California has not put forward a bold, comprehensive approach to fully integrate new American immigrants into our state. During the 20th century, the nation launched a movement involving federal, state, and local governments, business, labor, unions, schools, and social organizations to help integrate immigrants into our society. Currently, however, few of these programs exist and are minimally funded and uncoordinated. California should be leading the nation in integrating immigrants into our society because successful integration of new American immigrants is essential to California's future growth and sustainability. At the state level, immigrants pay roughly $5.2 billion in state income taxes and $4.6 billion in sales taxes each year. Additionally, our state's local economy benefit a great deal from economic contributions of our immigrants. It is vital that California be ready to receive and help integrate new Americans when immigration reform is passed, because citizenship and civic participation of all Californians is essential to the economic, societal well-being of our state. Let's build some momentum and ensure everyone is fully aware how important comprehensive immigration reform is to our state, but also how vital it is to our nation. With that, I would like to introduce Assembler V. Manny Perez, who is both the vice chair of our Latino Caucus and is the chair of our Latino Caucus Immigration Reform Task Force. Assembler Perez, I want to thank you on behalf of our membership for your leadership on this panel today and for your continued support and championing immigrant issues throughout the state. It's an honor to serve as the chair of the caucus with your leadership as the vice chair. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you as well, Senator Lara, and just want to say your efforts, your leadership, your dedication to the Latino Caucus is also important to us as well as it is your efforts on behalf of the immigrant community throughout the state of California. Really appreciate your efforts as well. And I want to say thank you to all of you that are here, the grassroots, the organizers, those of you that are from labor, those of you from agriculture, those of you that are the advocates. Really appreciate your presence here, and we look forward to our discussion as we move forward. And as well, Kashko Achajian, thank you for being here. Mr. Hernandez, Ms. Garcia, Senator Canela. And I know that others as well are on their way. They'll be popping in and out. This is going to be about a 3-hour-long hearing because there's so much to discuss. Just as it is for all of us in this room today, the issue of paving a clear pathway to citizenship for undocumented individuals in this country is one of the highest importance, I'm sure to you, but as well as for me. And in the 56th Assembly District, which I share a border, we share a border with Mexico, I often see firsthand the negative impacts that our current immigration system has had on our families, our community and our economy, as well even within our educational system. So it's no secret that California is home to the largest undocumented population in the country. According to the Public Policy Institute of California, in 2010, our state was home to an estimated 2.6 million undocumented people. Almost a quarter, 23%, of the nation's undocumented immigrants reside in California. It is therefore in the interest of the Latino Caucus, as leaders in this great state, that work towards ensuring and improving the health and safety of all Californians to address the issue of comprehensive immigration reform as one unified, strong voice. And the purpose of today's hearing is to help us to do just that. The purpose of today's briefing is to help us ascertain the role of the Latino Caucus in the context of the immigration reform debate so that together we can move forward and advocate for immigration policy at the federal level that ensures a humane, fair path to citizenship and that addresses the dire need for labor to strengthen our economy. Today we will hear from various groups and industries who are stakeholders in the comprehensive immigration reform debate. As you see in your agenda, we will first discuss a historical and policy overview of comprehensive immigration reform. Then we will hear from 3 specific industries that heavily rely on immigrant labor. From there, we will hear from 3 labor unions. And lastly, but certainly not least, from our immigrant rights groups. Thereafter, we will have a public comment period for any person in the audience who would like to address a matter on the agenda or would like to make a comment that is within the subject matter thereof. Today's briefing is significantly important in that it is the first of its kind. I want to thank the members who have taken time out of their busy schedules to listen to today's conversation. And I want to just say a thank you as well to the Latino Caucus Immigration Task Force that consisted of Senator Ricardo Lara, Kevin De Leon, Assembly members Roger Hernandez, Cristina Garcia, and as well Luis Alejo. And with that being said, just want to thank once again all of you that are here with us. And if we could go ahead and get straight into the conversation, because we're already behind schedule, I want to make sure that we move forward, and then we'll have some Q&A, some discussion. So can we get Angelica Salas, Arnaldo Torres, and Peter Shea as well up here to give us their testimony, please? And I just want to say as well, thank you to Assemblymember Dolly for being here with us. Appreciate your presence as well. So who'd like to go first? Angelica Salas, we have you listed here first as Executive Director of Coalition for Human and Immigrant Rights of Los Angeles, otherwise known as CHIRLA.
Yes. Sure. First of all, I just want to say thank you so very much to the Latino Caucus for their leadership on this an important issue and for all the work that you have done. And I've taken a special time to also thank the Republican members who co-authored a very important opinion piece stating the importance of immigration reform to the state of California, and that I want you to know that our community saw it and recognized it, is very appreciative of it, and I so appreciate your presence here today. So thank you very much first for having us. I'm going to be talking about where are we on the fight for immigration reform currently, and also what we have been doing in the field in order to gain bipartisan support for this important piece of legislation. As already stated by Representative Perez, California has much to gain for immigration reform. One out of every six child in California is the child of an undocumented parent. This matters a lot to our children. Most of these children are, 80% of them, over 80% of them are U.S. citizens. So we're not just talking about, in a sense, what's happening to immigrants now who are adults, but really their children who are the future of this state. The Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights of Los Angeles has been fighting for immigration reform since the late 90s, especially after the passage of the 1996 immigration reform law that made it more restrictive for individuals to bring in legally their U.S. citizen spouses, U.S. citizen family members. And we talk a lot in the country, we talk a lot about 1986, the amnesty of 1986. But everybody has amnesia about the 1996 law that was passed by a Republican Congress that made it extremely difficult for individuals, especially from countries like Mexico, Central America, to legally bring in their family members. And how did they do that? They imposed things like the 3 and the 10-year bar. So even though you are a U.S. citizen and can lawfully bring in your family member into the country, if that family member entered the country without legal status, as a penalty, have made them wait 3 years if they were in the country for 6 months undocumented, and 10 years additionally if they were in the country without legal status for a year. Now, this is what has brought us to a place where we have ballooned the undocumented population across the country, but certainly in California. It's the lack of legal means by which individuals can come into this, into the country, and the lack of ability once in the country, even if you have qualifying U.S. citizen relatives or qualifying legal permanent resident relatives, that you can't legalize your status. So that's why you have so many stories of heartbreak where you have U.S. citizen spouses or U.S. citizen parents who are in this situation, or you have children who are U.S. citizens, their parents who are undocumented, who can't legalize your status. I came to this country undocumented. My parents came undocumented. But when the laws were different during the time that we came, I had one U.S. citizen brother, and for his well-being and for his betterment, our whole family was able to legalize. That has changed. That is not possible today. We have many young children, U.S. citizens, whose whole family has been torn apart because we're not looking at their well-being. So what is being considered in Congress? What we're considering in Congress is bipartisan, comprehensive immigration reform solution that includes the ability to fix our legal system, our immigration system, so that people can have legal entry into the country by reducing the backlogs, but also by reducing the ability, especially by eliminating visas for certain legal permanent residents who could otherwise qualify their relatives. It also includes the path to citizenship, different and very restrictive than any other immigration bill that we've ever had, but it gives individuals provisional legal status that they will have for a period of up to 10 years before they become legal permanent residents. This is so different than we had during amnesty, where you would go forward, you'd have the provisional status for a short period of time, but immediately would become a legal permanent resident, which is a green card holder. This status provides individuals access to the green card, but you have to wait 10 years. So it's a restrictive process, but it is a process by which individuals can move forward. This is the proposal that had passed the Senate. We are stuck, however, because the House leadership has decided that they will not move on a comprehensive product, which exists in the House of Representatives, that has been crafted by both sides of the aisle, but has instead decided that they're going to take it piece by piece. And from our perspective, piece by piece, without legal status, means no reform at all. But the decision is piece by piece and no vote on citizenship. So across this country, what we have been moving forward is an aggressive campaign to move House leadership to take a vote on citizenship immediately. And especially for us in California, and why we're so important as California. In California, we have Representative Kevin McCarthy, who is the majority whip, the third most important Republican in this country, who, if we can convince him to move leadership, to take a vote on citizenship, to actually move in a direction like in the Senate, in terms of the politics of it, that we could actually move this situation forward. In addition to that, in California, we have 15 Republicans from our perspective, 12 who are could potentially vote on reform. So across this state, through the California Table for Immigration Reform, that brings together over 100 organizations, immigrant rights organizations, labor organizations, faith-based organizations, moving, again, an aggressive field campaign to convince our members of the Republican side of the aisle to vote on reform. And we have been having very positive results. We've had certainly Congressman Nunez, who's come forward in favor of legalization with a path to citizenship. Most recently, we had Congressman David Valadao from Hanford, who again came forward with his constituency in his district saying, yes, I'm for reform with a path to citizenship. Congressman Denham. We have much more work to do with all the rest of the members. But what we need to do right now is convince our California congressional Republican delegation that this is in the best interest of this country. As an immigrant rights organization, we are not yet satisfied with the entire product because it is a very negotiated product. But what we do know is it includes a path to citizenship. It includes an expedited path for agricultural workers and for dreamers. For all the individuals who have been on temporary protected status for over a decade and a half, individuals who have never been able to travel to their country but have been allowed to work, they will, if they show that they've been here for 10 years, also enter into legal permanent residency status. And it fixes a lot of the legal system that currently prevents us from bringing in our family members in a legal way. So because of that, we keep moving forward. And I ask the Latino Caucus to keep moving forward, keep doing what you're doing, and keep going into your districts, especially where we have members of Congress who are who are Republican, to move this forward, to ask especially Representative Kevin McCarthy to be a leader for California, and in so doing, be a leader for the rest of this country. I want to just explain very quickly. This is about human beings. It's about our children's lives. It's about children who live in fear of parents being deported. But it's also about the fact that we have a system right now that is in the hands of cartels and of bad actors. We want a system that is controlled by bureaucrats, immigration bureaucrats, who are able to allow individuals to come in, stamp passports, stamp visas, allow individuals to come in through a legal process, instead of being in the hands of trafficking actors, of cartels, who are basically taking the business of immigration away from our bureaucrats. And so we have too many deaths, too many broken families. We're here to keep our families together, and in this moment in time, what we need to do is move forward a House process, and we need to do this urgently. We cannot wait another year. I've been working on this since the late 90s, and every year that moves forward, more lives, without a fix, more lives are destroyed and more families are destroyed, and we can't afford that in California any longer. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Angelica, as well. We appreciate your efforts that you've been moving on for years now on behalf of Chirla and as well just as an immigrant rights advocate. Thank you for all your work. I want to hold off on questions and let our next presenter or presenters speak. And in that way, we can have a lively dialogue. And so I understand Mr. Peter Shea.
Yeah, me.
In the flesh.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late.
Well, thank you for being here. We appreciate it. We just got started. And looking forward to your testimony. And then as well, Arnaldo Torres.
Great. Go ahead, Peter. Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation, and I'll try to be brief. I was asked to speak sort of on the big picture, kind of the historical picture, and so I think there will be several witnesses who will discuss some of the pros and some of the positive aspects of the current proposal in Washington. And so I wanted to give a bit more of a critical analysis of some of the shortcomings that we see and some of the ways that this could potentially be improved. Firstly, I think it's important to recognize that a large part of the current immigration crisis is caused by provisions that were enacted in 1996 and that nobody is seriously talking about repealing. Those provisions, at that time, Newt Gingrich was in charge of the Congress or running things, and President Clinton was in the White House. But they passed certain provisions that are drastic and that have drastically increased the undocumented population in the United States. They passed what are called the 3 and the 10-year bars. This is a brand new idea, but it basically says if you've been here for 12 months or longer illegally, even if you're married to a U.S. citizen or a green card holder, or you have a parent or child, and you can normally immigrate for the previous 100 years, you can immigrate. As of 1996, there was a 10-year bar if you'd been here for 12 months illegally. They created a lifetime bar if you've ever falsely claimed to be a U.S. citizen. That could be on a job, it could be anywhere, it could be at the border. So these 1996 laws are very draconian. They remain on the books. There's no serious effort to change them. What they've done is they didn't force people to leave the country. What they did was they bloated the undocumented population. They exploded the undocumented population simply because they blocked traditional avenues that people could immigrate. The kid turned 21, you could immigrate. Didn't matter if you'd been here illegally. Married U.S. citizen, green card holder, you could immigrate. Didn't matter if you'd been here illegally. It was obviously targeted at Central Americans and Mexicans because those are, not all, but those are good 55% of the people who've been here illegally. So that's sort of the context that has brought us to having approximately 10 million undocumented people. I think that in figuring out how to fix the system, there are 2 basic approaches that are on the table. And one basic approach is comprehensive immigration reform. The other basic approach is incremental immigration reform. There's certainly pros and cons to both approaches. The obvious pro of immediate comprehensive immigration reform, at least if you look at what the Senate has come up with, is you potentially legalize maybe 11 million people. I've prepared an analysis, which I think your staff has gotten and has read, in which I think that given the stumbling blocks that are placed in the Senate's immigration bill, I don't think more than about 4.5 million. What will happen is you have about 1 million people who will legalize through ag jobs because they're the influence of the growers and the union have united. So it's a straightforward legalization program and a positive one that I would fully support. You look at the proposal for the DACA, recent arrivals, the Dreamers, that's fairly straightforward. I would support that. That's probably going to legalize another 1 million. So ag jobs will legalize 1 million. DACA will legalize 1 million. That'll take you down to 9 million. What's the program for the other 9 million? I have real problems with that program. I helped write the 1986 program. Back then I was a lot younger, less gray hair, and I worked for the Select Commission on Immigration and Refugee Policy. That was a bipartisan commission that drafted the legislation for Congress. That legislation, I'm not saying was fantastic, but at least the road to citizenship was something like 7 years. You know, you had temporary resident status, no huge stumbling blocks. After whatever it was, 2 years you could apply for a green card, then after 5 years you could apply for citizenship. It was relatively unchallenging. Even then, you know, a lot of people were denied. But when I compare that to the current program, at least what's come out of the Senate, it has certain provisions in it that I just find horrible. It has a provision that says nobody can get a visa through this program, permanent resident status, until all pending applications have been processed. Well, all pending applications is 4.5 million. Well, you'd say, well, throw a little bit more money at that, and in 5 years, 10 years, you should be able to clean up those 4.5. But the problem is, when you have a massive program like that, you always have what I call straggler cases. Might just be 1,000, might be 800, might be 500, but cases just get lost, don't get resolved, they're complicated, they think the person's a communist, don't ask me what. So you're always going to have these straggler cases. So that's a major problem to me, to say every single, what the Senate bill says is all, doesn't use most or the majority, it says all. That could be 30 years from now. It could never happen. That's number one. Number two, I find the provision that you have to maintain employment extremely troubling. I was just talking a couple of days ago. The guy's been here 15 years. He's from Guatemala. He's supporting his kids back in Guatemala. He goes out looking for work as a day laborer 7 days a week, and he told me he's lucky if he works 3 days a week. That guy's not going to make it through this program. So this idea that you have to have continuous employment, it's a bad idea. Number one, it ties people to the employer. So that they're going to be, you could have sexual abuse, you could have sexual harassment, you could have racial discrimination, you could have overtime you're not being paid for. And nowadays you just go, I'm undocumented, I'm gonna leave this job, I'm gonna find another job. It's a worse situation if you figure my green card's hanging on this. If I lose this job and I'm unable to find another job within 60 days, I'm potentially toast. I'm gonna lose my status. So I think the idea of forced employment, that you must be employed, is going to have an unusual, harsh impact on day laborers, on women, and I'm mostly concerned with the low-income immigrants, and that's the population that's going to be hit. And then you have the long time periods. Instead of sort of a 6-7 year path to citizenship, given those roadblocks, you're looking at a minimum of 15 years, an absolute minimum. And again, if some of these roadblocks, it could be, Lord knows what, could be 15. Now, on the other side of the coin, in my opinion, you have going forward an absolute no-tolerance policy. So going forward, it's harsh, harsh, harsh. That's the trade-off. You want this amnesty, you want this legalization. Going forward, it's zero tolerance. There's going to be tens of thousands of people charged criminally for illegal entry. The road forward is going to be strict law enforcement. There's going to be massive increase in detention, massive increase in border enforcement. So the question that I think folks have to ask themselves, and it's a tough question. I'm not suggesting it's an easy question. This guy that I met a couple of days ago, he'd love to have some sort of temporary status, and if it's going to take him 20 years and going forward everybody else gets screwed, he probably doesn't care. It's a tough question. But there is a question, is this the right time for comprehensive immigration reform? You could ask yourself, is this the right time to go to the U.S. Congress and get comprehensive LGBT reform? Well, 9 out of 10 people would say, not exactly. Let's wait a few more years, see if the complexion of Congress changes. We could potentially get LGBT reform tomorrow, but we may not like a lot of what's in there. Or could we get comprehensive wage and hour reform? So, there's a question. The society is so polarized, and the Congress is so polarized, that could you get something called immigration reform? Absolutely. But is it going to be sort of the kind of legalization program that we would like to see? And probably not. And is the price you're going to have to pay for that exorbitant in terms of future enforcement? Absolutely. So the second approach, and again, there's pros and cons to both, but the second approach is more of an incremental approach. Have the Latino Caucus come out and support an incremental approach. What does that mean in a nutshell? Well, number one, you hopefully wouldn't need these Republican, the Tea Party types, insisting on $40 to $80 billion in new enforcement, because that's the trade-off for like legalizing 11 million people at once, including folks who just came here recently with no family ties here. So if you do an incremental approach, you potentially don't need to give up that much in terms of enforcement. You can go for a $5 billion enforcement program instead of a $40 or $80 billion. What would an incremental approach look like in a nutshell? Number one, I would take every person who's here, which I think is over 3 million people, who are in the system. They've played by the rules. They've come forward. They've applied for a visa, but they're in this federal pipeline. They face quotas. They've got a 3-year wait, a 6-year wait, an 8-year wait, but they're in the system. Department of Homeland Security knows who they are, where they are, their address, their phone number, their fingerprints, their cell phone number, their email, everything. Take those 3 million plus people, and whether you could do this through the White House, just like they did for DACA, or you could do this through legislation and just give them temporary status. You say, hey, you have to wait till you get to the front of the line to actually get your green card, but in the meantime, you can come out of the underground. You know, it's so funny. They're not in the underground for Department of Homeland Security. It doesn't chase them down and deport them. It's in their system. But for every other aspect of their life, they're living an undocumented presence. So you could take that population, what I would call the pipeline population, and Obama could do this tomorrow. And you could call on Obama to do this just for California. Of course, he'd never do it, but it'd be an interesting concept to say, we want to see you do the same thing that you did for these dreamers, who, by the way, have no statutory route to legalization. We want you to take these other folks, and you probably have at least 1 million in California, who are in the pipeline. They do have a statutory route, but they've got quota waiting periods. And just give them temporary status. Just give them deferred action status, which means they get a work permit. They come out of the underground. Number two, TPS. You've all heard of TPS, temporary protected status. There's like 500,000 Central Americans been living in California for 15 years on temporary protected status. Give them give them a green card status, not in 20 years. Give it to them in 3 or 4 or 5 years. They've already been living here for 15 years. They've played by the rules. Then you could do your ag jobs. You could do your DACA folks. And bam, you're up to 6 million people. But with a simple path to legalization. Now, that doesn't cover everybody, obviously, because it doesn't cover people who've recently arrived. So in a nutshell, those are the two approaches. I think it would be interesting to bat around the idea of having the Latino Caucus send a letter to Obama and say, hey, just can you think about this? Do you know what you did for all those DACA kids, 500,000 kids? They have no statutory right to legalize, but you know they had ties here, they've been living here for a while. You decided to just give them what's called deferred action status, which is nothing more than it's a work permit and you can travel. You can get permission to travel. Why don't we do the same thing for the 500 or 750,000 people who are living in California illegally, but they're in your system. Mm-hmm. They're not in our system. They cannot get driver's licenses. They're reluctant to report crime. So in our system, they're illegal, but strangely enough, in your system, in DAH system, they're actually in your system. They're in the pipeline. Why don't you give those people in California some temporary, not give them a green card, just give them deferred action status, same thing you're doing for the dreamers. And boy, you'd solve a large part of the problem. So I think I would leave it at that. And grin.
Thank you for your testimony. I think you brought up many great points, and that's quite frankly why we're here as Latino Caucus and other members as well. So we have folks here from the Republican Party that are concerned about the issue, which I think is great. The fact that we're willing to sit here and work together on this issue, hopefully in the future. But I think that your points that you're making are great points. That's why we're here as Latino Caucus, to try to see what our next steps are going to be.
I really appreciate the opportunity and your interest and your concern in this issue.
Sure. And so before I open it up for questions, I want to hear from Arnaldo Torres, and I also want to make sure I welcome Assemblywoman Gonzalez and Assemblymember Alejo as well to our dais, to our hearing. And Mr. Torres, you have 7 minutes.
7 minutes. I want to begin by thanking you and congratulating the caucus for this informational hearing. I wish that caucuses throughout the United States and state houses would have done the same on more than one occasion between May and now. I think this is very, very important, and I encourage anything that can be done between now and October 1st to continue this dialogue in the districts with the community directly. Because as Peter said, and as Angelica has implied, this is very difficult. It's easy for someone like me, perhaps, people would think, to give you what we think ought to happen to people who don't have legal status. I'm born here. I've had relatives that were undocumented. I will have relatives that will be undocumented in years to come from Chihuahua. Great state. I know that you guys are all very discriminatory against Chihuahua, but I'm very proud of being from Chihuahua. There's too many from Michoacan and Jalisco, in my opinion. There should be more from Chihuahua. But so the reality is that it's a very difficult thing for us to provide our analysis, for me to provide my analysis, because it's not an easy thing to do what Angelica has been doing since 1990. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. It's almost a no-win proposition when you advocate on this issue. Peter and I did it back in the 70s, late 70s, and throughout the 80s. And there is no win-win here. It's a very difficult position to be in. But perhaps what differs us in the sense that of our perspective is that we have done this once before, and we can compare to a great extent the difficult positions that people like Angelica and Enrique and the others that will be testifying, as well as people in the business community, have. The difference in the 80s, which is a very important historical significance, is that it was as much a policy discussion then as it was political. In fact, it was more policy. Why? Because, as Peter indicated, there was a select commission. A great deal of time was spent on the policy. What you have today is more of a political discussion. What can pass Congress, as opposed to what will work? Peter gave you a very good analysis, and his analysis is an excellent piece of work that really tells you what is not going to work well. The legalization provisions will not work well. And that's exactly where we are today. The political debate at the national level is about political. It's about politics. It's about what can pass Congress, not what will work once it's passed in Congress. Very different distinction between our time in the 80s and now. The other very important distinction is that we would have never appeared in any, and we never appeared in any session, certainly not the ones that Peter organized, because they were all designed to be very aggressive and hold us accountable, those of us who are representing DC. We never supported the IRCA law. Not once did we ever testify in support of that bill. We never liked the bill. We never felt it was an answer to the problem, because we felt economics were the problem that caused the movement of people from an underdeveloped, developing country to a developed country. And unless you have economic solutions for an economic problem, you're never going to really deal with the problem honestly and directly and effectively. And we, in fact, were prophetic about that. We testified over 100 times, and we made these statements consistently in the House and the Senate. There is nothing different this time, except that it's worse now. This is really bad politics as opposed to policy. Other very important differences from or comparisons of the later or the previous year is that Hispanics had not been discovered. Now you are very important people at a time when, you know, before you all were born or before you even had your legs, nobody knew Hispanics that much in politics. Now everybody talks about the importance that Hispanics play. The problem is that there's not a substantive discussion about how people should respond to the needs of a community. The responses, again, are political. The Republican Party is concerned about losing. Some are. Ted Cruz doesn't give a hoot. Okay? Others in the party don't give a hoot. Democrats all have an interest. Everyone that's involved in this debate has very specific interests, either political, economics, or I want to be the mero in my community, in Coachella, in Los Angeles, in New York. This is not about policy, but it's a difficult call for the reasons that Peter talks about, because you have people who will come up to me because they will occasionally see me on television. They'll say, "What do you think, Senor Torres? Should we support this or shouldn't we support it?" The reality is that most of our people do not know what's in this bill for them to make up their own mind, and they have to make their own decision. Many people seem to have been saying that they want this bill, but I tell you very sincerely from anecdotal, because I certainly can't talk to 11 million people, I think there's a great deal of confusion. The difference, again, was in the 70s, we had countless meetings and town hall hearings throughout the United States on this issue. Countless. We were held accountable for what we were advocating. We had community representatives constantly coming to Washington. There were a number of problems that this created at times, but there was also such an important flow of information that kept the process very transparent and very honest. People knew that a legalization program was not designed to accommodate all of the undocumented that were in the United States in the 1980s. We never represented the bill as doing that. However, I have a speech here from the President of the United States in Las Vegas, in which he clearly implies that all 11 million people are going to be given the path to legalization in this bill. And as you've heard from Mr. Shea, and as you heard from Ms. Salas, this bill does not accomplish that. This bill was never intended to accomplish that, because a legalization program is not designed to be an amnesty program. This is not an amnesty. If you want an amnesty, then everybody gets the slate clean, everybody comes in. This is not that bill. This bill was never going to accommodate 11 million people, and yet that is how it was represented to everyone. Going back to the issue of economics, in the 80s, we talked about the fact that major movements of human beings throughout the world are political difficulties, instability, economic instability. You have to deal with it economically. There isn't anything in this bill today, from the time that I addressed you in February at your caucus policy session in Los Angeles, not one single thing changed. Not only in the legalization program, understand this, the analysis that Peter has provided you, he analyzes provisions in the Senate bill that were in that bill in February. Nothing changed. Not one word changed in the Senate provisions. Okay? Not one single thing. Yet people are under the impression that all 11 million people will have a chance to come into the program, when less than half of that population will really have a fair chance to become a legal permanent and possibly a citizen of the United States. Very, very important distinction. In the 80s, we made it clear we're going to try to pass a bill that tries to accommodate as many people as we can in the simplest of ways. And the other thing that we're going to try to address is the needs of state and local governments. Why? Because in the bill in the 80s, this population became, if they went through the process correctly, after 2 years, permanent resident alien status. And as a permanent resident alien, you have a right to certain services that are being provided by state, federal, and local governments. Congress passed the bill, the State Legalization Impact Assistance Grant provisions, that ended up providing almost $12 billion to states for the purposes of providing bare minimum services in healthcare and other social services for this population. There isn't anything in this bill that addresses that. However, you have an analysis by the Congressional Budget Office that says after expenses of this population, when they become legal, whether it be the ones who are in the queue now or the ones that come in as DACA or as the agriculture, they will generate $460+ billion from 2014 to 2023. They will expend 220-something million. A grand total net profit to the United States Treasury, $197 billion. And yet, the Senate bill or the House bills do not provide for any of that reinvestment of that money that this population will be generating to state and local governments to help that population integrate itself into American society. We're not talking about entitlement programs. We're talking about fairness. We're talking about common sense. You're going to try and legalize a population, but you're going to keep them out of the system for 10 or 15 years. Regardless of what illnesses that they acquire, it's secondary. Regardless of all of the money that they have paid into the system that they have had no chance to recoup, you have $197 billion in benefits. So you have a number of other difficulties, and I'll try to close the 7 minutes. Governor Brown.
If you can, Mr. Torres,
Yes.
close in a minute or less.
There you go. Governor Brown issued a letter to the Senator of California on May 13th, in which the governor says in his letter, on the last page, to that end, I have asked my Secretary of Labor to identify all state special fund resources that can be used for the implementation of immigration reform, including fulfillment of employment requirements and assistance in learning English. Yet this governor's budget turned around and killed adult education in many regards for English language instruction. He not only did that, but you read the paper today that as a result of the federal sequestration and the UI benefits, there's going to be reductions in EDD. So what kind of implications in the EED reduction will that be on helping on dealing with employment requirements? Third, in healthcare, you may have another witness that will be coming in to testify. His policies in this state are in fact putting a burden on the network of community health centers that serve this population. And they're the only ones who can effectively serve them under federal law. They're allowed to serve undocumented workers and persons. But this governor's policies are not moving at this point in the direction of helping this population. They're moving away. So these are my recommendations. I would strongly urge you, as Peter has, to look at Peter's analysis, and as a caucus, write the letter accepting and proposing the recommendations that Peter has laid out in his analysis. The second is I would ask that you recommend that you would write a letter to the governor consistent with the legislation that Mr. Lara has introduced and ask him for an update on what the results have been of what he has asked the Secretary of Labor in his cabinet to provide information on, taking into consideration the actions that he has taken, his administration has taken since that letter was written through the budget. So I think these are very, very important, very, very real things that can begin to open up this discussion and allow you to decide probably at the beginning of November if you can come back and really address whatever Congress does. I would close by saying this. When I was in Washington, I walked away from the table many times when we were given a deal. We were offered certain provisions. We didn't accept those provisions. We said that's not good enough. We didn't do that in this bill. We gave the leverage to Mr. Schumer and Mr. McCain and the Gang of Eight and this administration. We have simply allowed ourselves to go along, to get along. Difficult call. If I was there, I would have made a different call. We made a call in those days that we would not support a bill that we did not think was the answer. But we also were able to still influence this legislation significantly, especially on the legalization provisions. So it's not about having your cake and eating it too. It's about using the leverage that's there, natural leverage. If we had not allowed Schumer and McCain and the others to negotiate on our behalf, in essence, who would they have negotiated for? Where would there have been a bill? What would have been the impetus if the Hispanic community was saying, this is not good public policy? So, bottom line, this is not good public policy. It's not any better. In fact, it's worse than the one that we passed in '86. Thank you very, very much, and congratulations on the hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Torres. I'm sure that there's some questions from our dais. Look around. Anybody like to ask a question or two? Mr. Dolly, Mr. Lara, Mr. Alejo, Ms. Gonzalez. Well, I'll raise the question. Where do we go from here? You mentioned a couple of practical steps that the Latino Caucus can perhaps move forward with. You mentioned a letter, perhaps to the governor, and asking the governor, where are we? From last, he wrote to our president and to Congress, letting them know that we need comprehensive immigration reform. I've heard from folks as well that perhaps we need to go back into our communities and listen to our community members and hear from them what it is their concerns, and then for us as well to provide them the facts as to what's really going on at the federal level. But I think part of our struggle, and the reason why we're having this hearing, is that our community is split. And that's part of the reason why that we decided to have the hearing here as opposed to having throughout the state of California. And so what is the win-win? What is the practical? What's that midpoint compromise of policy versus politics? Because that's really where we're at right now, I think. And it's tough for us to figure that out, and that's where we're looking towards you. So that's a loaded question, but I'd like to just hear your thoughts on that, and if maybe all of you can express yourselves to that point.
So,
quickly.
So very quickly. So the moment is now. There is every moment. This is the way I see it. This is like the analogy that I use. It's like when you're in a boxing match. Every time that you get a chance, the bell rings, and you get a chance to actually win, you go up and you fight like hell in order to win. And this is our moment right now. This is the moment. This is the closest we've ever gotten. Our policy is a product of our power as a community, and we need to use this moment to build our political power on the ground and to make sure that independent of party, Democrat or Republican, people respond to their constituents, the people that live in their district. And so all across California, we have immigrants. There has been no movement in the last, I would say, decades that has mobilized more immigrants, their family members, U.S. citizens. We have both sides of conservative, progressive on our side. And so we need to take advantage, because the more we build unity and power, the better the policy gets. And so for me, it's right now, the Senate bill, yes, there is a lot that needs to be worked off. If we think that this is the final fix, well, then we're fooling ourselves, because what we're fighting for is bigger than this bill. It's about recognition. Recognition, a formal recognition of our community, first that we live here and that we produce and that we give to this country and to this state. That's that's one of the most fundamental things we're fighting for. We're fighting to make sure that across this state, Latinos, their children, are actually taken into account, that they're represented. And that means that, in certain members of Congress, they won't even take a meeting with our members because they're Latino, because they're poor. That needs to change. And when that changes, you know what? The policy changes. So right now, what we have is a flawed bill, but it is a bill that immediately does reduce the backlogs, because it does. It goes into eliminated reductions of LPR status. Immediately, it gives people on temporary protected status who've been here for more than 10 years, it gives them access to a green card. It gives our young people hope, because they're able to go beyond DACA and immediately become citizens. And the same thing with all our agricultural workers. So it is not the perfect bill, but we understand there's not perfection. And I want to just say something. Our folks are more sophisticated politically. They get that what is being here is not the best negotiated piece, but they're willing to roll up their sleeves and get to work in order to have a better product. And so we're not done yet. It's not over yet. We haven't even gone through a House process. We haven't gone into a conference committee process. We need to let democracy work, but we need to make it work with us participating. And that's what I'm about. And that's what our organization is about the engagement of our community. And it's not about Republicans or Democrats. It's about our folks and how they're going to hold Democrats and Republicans accountable to their needs and to make sure their families are protected. And the last thing I want to say is people are being deported every day. We need something, not for the folks who have a legal means by which to enter, because some of those folks, when they go before a judge, they'll say, you have something in the system, what could we do for you? It's for the folks who have nothing, and those are the folks who are being picked up by cops in all these horrible states, and in this state as well. But that's why we need the Trust Act, and we need protection so that these kids don't lose their parents. And that's what I think. And so the moment is now. My recommendation is it's a comprehensive fix. It includes, we want to vote on citizenship. We want to vote for individuals to get a legal permanent residence with an option for citizenship. That's what we need, and that's what I hope the Latino Caucus will reflect the need of our community today.
Thank you, Ms. Saez. I want to also welcome Assembly Member Calderon for joining us as well for this very important hearing. Mr. Dahlia, did you have a question?
First of all, I'd like to thank you, the Latino Caucus, for putting this on. This is a great event, and I think it's very important. But, Mr. Shi, you mentioned something about the difference between California and the federal government, and what's your ideas on how California can play the role in helping to move the federal folks? And I didn't quite get the depth of where you were trying to go there. So, we really have some small influence on our congressional leaders, but really our main focus is going to be here in California. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, good question, and I don't have definitive thoughts, but I'll give you just some sort of preliminary thinking. One is, I think it would be good to work with your staff and with whatever, however you'd want to define that, the staff of folks on the Latino Caucus, with groups like my group, which sort of does legal analysis and works things out, hopefully, to look at, are there things that California can do? There certainly is an issue. In fact, I'm ready to file a lawsuit around the driver's license, because I think that could be sliced a lot more intelligently than it is being sliced right now. Right now in California, you cannot get a driver's license unless you have a green card or basically a work permit. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not sure if you were here when I mentioned this, there are probably at least 750,000 people in California who are fully known to the federal government. They're in the DHS system. They're waiting, processing. They have what's called approved visa petitions. They have they've got a notice saying you have an approved visa petition, but guess what? You cannot apply for your green card for another 8 years. There's probably 750,000 people like that in California, and I bet you 80% of them are driving without driver's licenses. So that's one way we could slice that. We could file a lawsuit, the governor will settle it in 2 months, and we could agree that we're not talking about giving driver's license to every undocumented person, but I remember when I dealt with this with Gil Cedillo and with Schwarzenegger, Schwarzenegger's big thing was the security issue. I don't want to give a green card, a driver's license to Osama bin Laden. That's not an issue, and it shouldn't be an issue for Jerry Brown because these people are in the federal system. So I think working together, it would be one approach, and I don't have that's one quick one I have at the top of my head, but I bet you there are 3 or 4 others like that we could think about and brainstorm about and come up with ideas that are not going to be partisan. You're going to have Republicans agree with them, Democrats, that we could make some significant improvements. So that's on the state side.
Mr. Shea, can you respond in 30 seconds or less?
Yeah, in terms of the federal side, you know, a lot of this is perception, and I do think there's a 50-50 possibility that this bill is going to pass. Something's going to pass in the Congress. You know, it's got to be a 50% chance something's not going to. So I would think that the Latino Legislative Caucus should give serious consideration to devising a letter that we could help devise. You could even then run it by the rest of the people in the Senate, the Assembly. But to send a letter to Obama saying, we would like, you know, California's ground zero. We have more immigrants and more undocumented immigrants than any other state in the country, so we're ground zero. We'd like to make a suggestion to you that you could do administratively. You don't need to go to Congress, and that is extend deferred action status to every person living in California who's in your federal pipeline. They're part of your federal system. You've got their fingerprints, their emails, their phone numbers, their addresses. They're in your system, but they're waiting on this 5, 6, 7, 8 year backlog. Give them deferred action status, just the way you did to the Dreamers.
We'll stop there, Mr. Shea. I appreciate your point.
You're very welcome.
We're behind schedule, folks, so we're going to move forward.
You're not going to let me
And
close?
then as long coming in later. Thank you for your patience, gentlemen. Thank you for being here as well. If you could present in 5 minutes or less, and we're going to try to move this along as quickly as possible. And if Mr. Carl Guardino, if you can go first, that'd be great. Appreciate you being here.
It's an honor to be here, sir. Thank you to you and your colleagues for calling this hearing. For the record, my name's Carl Guardino. I'm president and CEO of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, and please allow me to share why I am so honored to be here both professionally and personally. In 1916, a very young teenage girl sailed into New York Harbor, past the Statue of Liberty, and onto Ellis Island from Palermo, Sicily, and took a very risky chance of leaving her family with a dream of a better life. And that young teenage girl was my grandmother. She had 9 children. She now has scores of grandchildren, and one of them is proud to be the CEO of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group in the heart of the Earth's innovation economy. So this is personal as well as professional for me. Let me, in the 4.5 minutes I have left, explain to you 3 reasons why we think this is important with an action item. First, for America's innovation economy, our nearly 400 CEOs in high-tech, bio and med tech, clean and green tech, venture capital, et cetera, depend upon a comprehensive immigration reform fix. And it would be easy and inappropriate for us solely to be focused on the needs of high-tech, high-skill, high-wage workers. This is an American issue, not just an innovation economy issue. But since that's what I know best, and since that's such a driving industry in California, let me share some thoughts of why this is so important. 53% of the engineers fueling Silicon Valley's innovation economy today were not born in the United States. More than 40% of the companies being formed in Silicon Valley today have at least one founder, if not the CEO, who was not born in the United States. More than 50% of the advanced technical degrees granted in universities across the United States go to foreign-born citizens, and more than 50% of the professors teaching those degrees were not born in the United States. Our diversity is our strength, and it shines bright through the innovation economy. We cannot risk our role as the global leader of innovation and its impact on jobs and the economy here in the United States by failing to capture this moment for comprehensive immigration reform. I have 3 minutes left, but it's broader than that. And that's why we have been early advocates not solely for immigration reform for tech workers, but comprehensive immigration reform. That has not always made us popular in all circles, even of the business community, let alone with all sides of this debate in Washington, D.C., but we believe it's right. And that's why we've embarked in a 4-step process that I will share in these final 2.5 minutes with
1 minute.
an action.
Final 1 minute.
Okay, good. First, we have national partnerships with 10 national strategic organizations based in D.C., leveraging each other's resources. Second, 24 strategic regional partnerships around our country to work our own delegations. Third, unlikely alliances ranging from Sister Simone and Nuns on the Bus to Bibles, Businesses, and Badges to the Strawberry Commission of California, with whom we just returned from D.C., 58 House visits, 33 Republicans, 25 Democrats. And here's the closer. We need you to join your colleague, Luis Alejo and Richard Gordon, when we go with 60 CEOs to Washington, D.C., October 1st through 3rd. We're more powerful together, and when we have unlikely alliances, we're more effective as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Guardino. Appreciate your presentation. I also want to thank Mr. Assemblymember Fong for being here with us today as well. We can continue to move forward. Mr. Barry Bedwell, President of the California Grape and Tree Fruit League. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity. Again, I commend the Latino Caucus for putting this together. Let me quickly go over a lot of numbers because agriculture in California is about productivity. And first, let me remind everybody that in 2011, California agriculture produced $43.5 billion worth of farm gate value. The numbers are being compiled for 2012. We expect those numbers to increase, actually, over that $43.5 billion. Keep in mind that that production represents almost 12% of the total U.S. agricultural production. 12%. There are over 81,500 farms and ranches in California. The top grossing sectors, based upon the latest statistics, were dairy at $7.7 billion, almonds $3.9 billion, grapes $3.9 billion, cattle $2.8 billion, nursery $2.7 billion, and berries $1.9 billion. The top producing counties Fresno at $6.9 billion, Tulare $5.6 billion, Kern $5.4 billion, Monterey $3.9 billion, Merced $3.3 billion. Those are greater than most states in the union, those counties. The agricultural workforce, per the EDD, this came out of 2011, the average annual employment is 385,300. Last year, the peak employment was in June 2012. There were 458,300 agricultural workers in the state. The workforce is 75.9% men, 24.1% women. It is rapidly aging. We see that. We can see it in the fields. The statistics show that in 2008, there was in 2006, 37% were between 35 to 54. In 2008, 47.5%. Clearly an aging workforce. Wages are rising due to a tightening labor supply. The statistics show that in December 2011, the average wage was $12.31. In December 2012, that number was $13.19, almost an 8% increase. When we talk about agriculture, we know firsthand the benefits of an agricultural workforce that is legal and stable. Because the reality is we talk about undocumented, and agriculture has been very clear from the outset that we realize the majority of our production workforce is documented, undocumented. Of course, you talk to every employer and they'll say, no, 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 we see the document. But the reality is we all know what those documents mean. California is the key to a domestic food supply. Nearly 1/2 of all fruits and vegetables in the country are grown in the state. We need to talk about food security as a national security issue. The comparison to foreign oil cannot be avoided. The reality is if we lose immigration reform, we are putting at risk the domestic food supply. The other issue is food safety. Many times we hear complaints about regulations and over-regulation, but the reality is we need to rely on the amount of regulations to produce consumer confidence and the reality that a domestic food supply brings in towards peace of mind for our consumers. It's about a healthier society. Immigration reform is about producing the fruits and vegetables needed for a healthier society and also to fight obesity. Most important, I think we've heard it briefly, but the idea of removing individuals from the shadows. I think all of us need to take the time to take a minute and understand what it might mean to have that uncertainty every day in your life if you're going to wonder if you're going to be able to come back to your family. Certainly, the majority of the agricultural workforce has that feeling. And I can't imagine a small child watching mom or dad go out the door and wondering if they're going to be able to come back. Politics, policy, absolutely. But the timing is such that we have to take advantage of what we can. Let me just mention briefly Bibles, badges, and business. That is the key to talking to the Republicans. It is really about expanding this so that they have an area to connect and understand why immigration reform is needed. Let me say in terms of central elements, a pathway to citizenship with reasonable requirements for those that desire the option is absolutely necessary. We have not heard the comments mostly about politics. Well, gee, we're concerned if somebody becomes a citizen, we're worried more about how they're going to vote politically. We should all look back and say if they're going to become citizens, they are better Americans. They are better producers. I doubt that many of us in this room could quite frankly pass the test on civics related to citizenship. We should all be pushing for citizenship. It makes us a better country. I think a timely means for the legal status for the currently undocumented and those recognizing reasonable fines and background checks. I think there needs to be a reasonable process. This isn't about amnesty. This is about earned adjustment of status. And we need a market-based program that allows for a legal and orderly flow of workers between their home countries, the United States. A visa program that works, that recognizes what's going on. Let me just say, Senate Bill 744, the agricultural portions were a negotiated section of that bill. Both agriculture and organized labor had heartburn over particular points of that bill. But overall, it really moves the ball forward as we need to. And we're now coming down to a period of time when we're looking at the House of Representatives to either put up or shut up. And the reality is, if we don't have something come out of the House that can be conferenced, we are going to be facing E-Verify. We're going to have electronic verification, which means our labor force is going to rapidly disappear. And that domestic food supply will disappear along with it. Let me just say my concerns about the Republicans, and everybody in this room, if you have a relationship, needs to talk to the Republicans about the need to get something passed that can be conferenced. I have concern over the Hassett rule, where a majority of the majority has to approve a bill. I really don't care how they get it done. They just need to get it done. I've heard too many times that we're already looking at a situation where out of 232 Republicans, we have 142 that have less than 10% Latinos in their district, and it really doesn't matter to them. It should matter to them because of the economic reasons, because of the religious reasons, because of the law enforcement reasons. We all need to be there. Let me just say briefly, when it was mentioned about Congressman McCarthy from Kern County, agriculture is working very proactively to try for him to assume the leadership role that he can. We just had an event last Wednesday in Bakersfield with Senator Marco Rubio, and it was not an accident that that event was held in Bakersfield. And we will continue those kinds of efforts. But again, thank you very much for the time to participate today.
Thank you, Mr. Bidwell. Appreciate your testimony as well. If we can move forward with Mike Nguyen, President and CEO of the California Building Industry Association, and then afterwards we'll open it up for some Q&A.
Thank you very much, members of the caucus. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. As the voice of the residential construction industry in the entire state, we want to thank you for your interest in immigration reform. The California building industry remains hopeful, despite some of the reality check we heard by the previous panel, and I think we're all better informed because of the comments, about the momentum that had been building in Washington on reform efforts. We find our priorities to be consistent with those of yours in the California Latino Legislative Caucus. Construction associations like CBIA represent thousands of employers and hundreds of thousands of workers in all facets of construction, from home building to road construction to heavy industrial development to specialty trade contractors and material suppliers. In 2006, Hispanic construction workers alone made up almost 40% of our workforce, 600,000 strong in California. Today, that number is down, as you can imagine, after a Great Recession, but it's still in the 440,000 range and appears to be on its way back up. Stepping back for just a moment to the federal policy debate, we believe that in order to be successful in fixing America's broken immigration system, any viable remedy must do four things: strengthen our national security, create a role for employers in an employment system that functions in a fair, efficient, and workable manner, practicality, address the realities of future workforce needs, which will be great, particularly in the construction sector, and then find a reasonable, rational way of dealing with the current undocumented population, which you've heard so much about. A seamless pathway to permanent legal status for those who have filled jobs otherwise left open by U.S. citizens will really help California companies expand and prosper as our lagging economy improves, helping ultimately everyone with job opportunities. And as our economy in the state recovers, companies in the construction sector are already facing some geographically isolated shortages of qualified workers. And that's workers in the craft professional trades as well as the less skilled laboring sector. For decades, as Carl pointed out, the immigrant workforce has pointed out a huge role in the growth and sustainability of all industries, but particularly construction. And we're proud to note that for many legal immigrants, like Irish and Italian workers 100 years ago, jobs in the construction industry provided them with a key opportunity to gain a foothold in America's middle class. Unfortunately, current immigration laws, which all but ignore the needs of sectors that utilize less skilled immigrant workers, disproportionately affect construction companies because of our very fluctuating and cyclical work needs. Any future immigration law must also include a program to provide legal path for foreign workers to enter the United States when the economy needs them, with fewer entering the U.S. when the economy contracts. Successful guest worker programs, for instance, ought to include annual visa cap that fluctuates based on demand-driven system and reflects real economic needs of the nation in real time, not 7 and 8 years too late or too early. Opportunities for employers to petition for an approved slot that allows them to hire visa-holding foreign workers and replace those workers if and when they move on to another approved job slot. A dual intent process that allows some foreign workers who have demonstrated a commitment to their jobs and their communities to choose to petition for a change in status to a permanent legal status in the United States. Additionally, the construction community supports the implementation of efficient, practical, accurate employment verification system that provides ample protection from liability for employers who do comply with the system in good faith. To wrap up and conclude, we strongly support the efforts of the Latino Caucus in hearing out this complex and somewhat contentious issue, but really remain hopeful that something can be done here to promote some progress in Washington. To support those who've earned a pathway to legal status for current undocumented workers. In the past few decades, the dynamic U.S. economy has revealed a real shortage of specialized and educated workers in the United States. We have a unique opportunity before us to reform our immigration policies to enhance our security, protect our economy, and continue our heritage as a welcoming country of immigrants. We urge you to continue working together to craft a reasonable and balanced approach to addressing America's immigration problems in a way that it resolves the issue, hopefully, in the long term. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me say thank you to all of you, Carl, Barry, and Mike, for your presentations, your testimony. I'd like to open up to the dais, members of the dais. Any questions, ideas? Go ahead. Ms. Gonzalez?
It's not a question. And I want to thank all of you for coming forward. In San Diego, we have tried to put together a coalition of, I don't think I'd heard the term before, but Bibles, badges, and business, along with, of course, labor and traditional groups who want immigration reform. Your voice in this can't be overstated. And I especially love Mr. Bedwell's passion. And I don't want to say that we don't often see on the business side the kind of passion that so many of us feel, maybe because it affects our families and our lives. And it's refreshing. And if you can, join Mr. Gardino and go to D.C. and really take it there, I think that all of you provide an important voice of balance. And really, I want to thank you for all of you for coming out in support of comprehensive immigration reform and the respect that shows your workers.
And I just wanted to mention that as we're trying to have this discussion, I know Mr. Bedwell and Mr. Gardina have gone to D.C. From California, as state legislators, we've also tried to frame the right tone as well. And in our resolution in support of immigration reform, we try to find some general principles that we could agree on. But for the first time in many decades, and here in Sacramento, at least to get 9 Republican Assembly members, 3 Republican senators to support that effort, I think is the right message we're trying to send out of our state. But you also are a part of that a strong voice, having agriculture at the table, high-tech and biotech, the building industry. We have the labor here and immigrant advocates speaking as well. But I think there's very few issues that come before us that we see that much agreement and people going on the same message. But I think it's also, your work has been very important because you're able to go after some of the key people that, as we all know, have been, could help influence other colleagues to bring votes to the table and really help reach an agreement. And I think some of your approaches and your message have been very helpful, targeting those particular members that I think are going to be key in the end. If we were able to get this result, it's going to be that message, as you were saying, Mr. Bedwell, of being able to reach those folks to do the right thing. And this hearing in Sacramento is important because we have over 2.5 million people in our state alone that would benefit from a comprehensive immigration reform. We stay with the largest immigrant population, and certainly we as state leaders should be weighing in what should be, and not only state leaders, but as business leaders and labor and all the different groups, we should be weighing in what a comprehensive immigration reform package should look like. Not that we just get it passed because we have to get it done this year, but hopefully that in the end that it's just to those workers, and that's very fundamental aspects, like having that right to vote one day or being able to run for office. The key aspects of being a U.S. citizen are not compromised, and I think those are important pieces, and I think you guys said it very well. So thank you for your efforts, and I look forward to doing that round in D.C. myself to talk to members and doing what you have done already on numerous occasions.
Thank you. Sheldon?
Yeah, I just briefly wanted to say, first of all, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, for putting this together. It's a very important issue. Clearly, we all see that to be the case. But there's a lot of information out there, and especially myself as a new member jumping into a lot of these issues, it helps to have the information so that I can better make a decision to do the right thing, not just for my community, but for the state as a whole. I also wanted to thank Assemblymember Dolly for showing up, representing the Republican caucus. It is important for you to be here because it's...
Kachi was here too.
you know, it's an issue for every Californian, regardless if you're Republican and Democrat. And I'm a big believer in that it really doesn't matter what you are, be it Republican, be it Democrat. But at the end of the day, we're all in it together, and we're either going to succeed together or we're going to fail together. So I really appreciate you being here, and it does stress, I think, even more so the importance that this issue has on the state. I also wanted to thank Assemblymember Fong for being here, for being the chair of the API caucus, because a lot of times when we think of immigration reform, we usually think of it as more of a Latino issue, but that's truly not the case. You know, when it comes to immigration reform, for me, I always like to think about what made not just this state great, but this country great. And it was immigration. It was the best and the brightest from around the world wanting to come to the land of opportunity to make a difference. And we were the place where you could come. And, you know, I always like to fall in love with the fact that America was the place where no matter who you were, what you knew or what you didn't know, you could become anyone, you could do anything, and you could provide a better life for your family. And I think that it's very easy to get lost in that, in the politics of things, but we are dealing with people. And the one experience that I had in my life where it became real was I had a good friend of mine who was brought to California, to the States as a baby. And his family saved, I think it was about $6,000, which actually took them a long time to save that money, and got a lawyer, started doing the process, paid the lawyer the money, and unfortunately the lawyer took off. I mean, they were illegal, undocumented, and the lawyer took off with the money, and that was all their money, and that's all they had. And for him, he went to our schools, he did everything, and I didn't meet him until I was a little bit older. But as far as he was concerned, he was American, he was a Californian, but he was, you know, in a way, a man without a country. And if he were to be sent back, which at any point in time it could have happened to him, he knew no one back in Mexico. This was his home. And I even went to my dad, who was in the legislature at the time, saying, "Dad, can you do something? I mean, can you please just look into it? Can you please help him in any way?" And of course, he said he'd look into it, but he came back and he said, "Son, I'm sorry, but there's just really nothing to be done. I want to help, but I just don't know how we do it." And you know, being at that point in time where, you know, I couldn't, you know, my father, being who he was, didn't know what the right answer was, and then running for office, and then being able to have the president working with deferred action, I was able to work with my friend to help him qualify and to be a part of deferred action, and now he's working his way towards citizenship. But it's, you know, that's a big issue, and for you guys to be here, it's just the beginning. I think there's a lot of work to do. We have a long way to go, but we got to start somewhere. And as maybe not so great, but also as great as what's going on in Washington may or may not be, at least we're talking about it. And but again, thank you guys for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Calderon. If we could go ahead and move forward and get our third panel here as well. Can I get Caitlin Vega, legislative advocate for California Labor Fed, as well as Diana Telesan Torres, I believe, National Vice President, UFW, and Mr. Mike Garcia, President of SEIU. And once again, thank you to Carl Guardino, Barry Bedwell, and Mike Nguyen for your presentation.
And on their way, and I just want to wish Caitlin Vega a happy birthday.
Well, today's your birthday. Well, happy birthday, Caitlin. Caitlin, you want to go ahead and start us off?
Sure. Mr. Chair, members of the Latino Caucus and the API Caucus, thank you for the opportunity to be here and to speak today on such an important issue. I was reflecting, watching all the coverage of the 40th anniversary of the March on Washington. It really feels timely to be talking about the current civil rights movement, and for us, the role of labor in that movement, because just as labor was part of the civil rights movement of the 60s, for us today, comprehensive immigration reform that is meaningful, that is real, that is truly a path to citizenship for a significant portion of undocumented workers is the top priority nationally, and it's the top priority for us here in California. And the reason for that is that we have seen from our unions, from our activism in the communities, from our community partners, that we really are not able to fulfill our mission, which is to build a path to the middle class for all workers, to allow workers to move out of poverty, to create economic self-sufficiency for themselves, and to pass something better on to their children. The American dream, we cannot achieve that without immigration reform. And I want to say, I too was moved by not only the passion, but also the compassion of the previous panel of employer speakers. So I want to say that before I go into speaking from kind of the worker perspective and labor's perspective. Unfortunately, not all employers view immigrant workers with the same level of compassion. And so instead, what we see oftentimes from unscrupulous employers is the threat of immigration consequences for any worker who ever speaks out about unfair or illegal working conditions. And so we feel like not only are we not able to bring people out of the shadows, not able to extend or expand the American dream, but instead what we see is the use of immigration status as a weapon against workers who are trying to make a better life for themselves, and really an obstacle to the state in trying to enforce our basic labor laws. There's a recent report from the National Employment Law Project entitled Workers' Rights on Ice, How Immigration Reform Can Stop Retaliation and Advance Labor Rights. It's a terrific report, and really what they find is the widespread use of these kinds of immigration threats, whether it's a day laborer who says at the end of the day, wait a second, you promised me that I was gonna get paid for 6 hours work and all you're giving me is $10. And the employer says, are you threatening me? I think I'm going to call the local police and report you, knowing, of course, that that's going to trigger a deportation hold. And in fact, in the process of writing this report, the National Employment Law Project found many, many workers who ended up in deportation proceedings, forced to leave their families, and the potential of returning to a home where they had no one, where they didn't speak the language, where they hadn't been in so many years, all of these things simply because they tried to exercise their rights under the law. For us, this is an unsustainable situation and an unjust situation, and it gives us great urgency in trying to achieve comprehensive immigration reform. In addition, we think that there are things the state can do. We're sponsoring 3 bills this year that are aimed at these kinds of employer threats against workers when they try to speak out and when they try to improve their working conditions. And we think that there's tremendous potential for the Latino Caucus and for California to help shape this debate, to say we can't say no. I mean, I think we're in a position we can't say no. We have to win real change because too many people are suffering, and what's at stake is simply too great. So we have to fight to win comprehensive immigration reform, but we should also be fighting to make it better. And I think, as many of the original panelists talked about, that really is our charge as the people who believe in this and are fighting for it, that as we mobilize to win votes, we're also focused on strengthening, preserving the parts of the Senate bill that we like, strengthening the parts and hopefully changing some of the parts that we don't like. I don't think there's any value to very many people in enacting a comprehensive immigration reform that leaves half of the undocumented population out and then requires things like E-Verify so that those people are never able to find a job. I mean, it just I think creates a situation even more dire for those workers who will be subject to tremendous exploitation. And it sets up a situation of kind of false promises for the entire Latino community, which I think, as many people here know, most families have people in different statuses. Most people, it's not a situation where you can't trick anybody into believing they got a comprehensive immigration reform if that's not what it is. If there's a program that is really going to be full of so many obstacles that it won't bring meaningful opportunities to legalize and become citizens, then I think that certainly the political consequences will be real, and I think we all appreciate the personal consequences on those families who will not be able to benefit, and on those workers who won't be able to benefit. So I think we in labor see our role as being strong advocates, bringing a sense of urgency to this issue on behalf of the workers we represent and on behalf of the workers that we don't represent. We try every day in this Capitol to speak on behalf of the most vulnerable workers in this state, and we know that many of them are immigrant workers. And so we bring a tremendous sense of urgency in wanting to get this done, and also wanting to make sure that what we do is something that we can be proud of, and that this truly is the civil rights movement of this generation. It's a great honor to be part of it, and it's a great honor to be up here with people like Mike Garcia, who is one of the reasons that labor is here in such strong support of immigration reform, something that people wouldn't have always assumed would be the case. But because we've had such a deep commitment to building a path out of poverty for immigrant workers and to embracing that movement within the labor movement, I think that puts us in a good position to fight for the best possible immigration reform we can achieve. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony, Kaylin. Appreciate your words. And if we could move forward, it doesn't matter, but either Diana Torres or Mike Garcia, either one is fine.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for the invitation and the Latino Caucus for really putting this event together here. Arturo Rodriguez could not be here today. He's in Washington, D.C. at the White House in a very timely meeting talking to top officials about next steps on immigration reform, and he's also among some other civil rights leaders who will be meeting with the president later on to celebrate the 50-year anniversary of the March on Washington, and also to talk about next steps in that arena. So, you know, we have definitely the civil rights leaders from the last 50 years, their shoulders to stand on. And really this March on Washington, among the core issues that they talked about was immigration reform, and comprehensive immigration reform at that. And so we know with farm workers, the vast majority of farm workers are undocumented in this country. The federal government says that 50% are undocumented. We believe with the UFW that it's more like 70 to 80%. And this really has a huge impact, as Caitlin mentioned, when it comes to how vulnerable they are, and especially at the workplace. And so we really want to make sure that everything is done as possible this year so that we have comprehensive immigration reform. We know that the industry is, the agricultural industry will be impacted greatly. And this is part of the reason why the UFW for the last more than a decade now has been working on a path to citizenship for farm workers, and decided to really work with the ag industry, with employers, on a bill or specifically, it used to be ag jobs, but this year specifically to negotiate something with the provisions on ag that would be included in both the House and a Senate bill that would really include what the needs for farm workers are, and at the same time the ag industry. And that's really something that's very unique. We don't often agree on much, but this is certainly an issue that we have very strongly advocated for many times together. And so, you know, this is going to be a huge impact. As Barry Bedwell mentioned, it's probably going to be about 1 million farm workers throughout the country who are undocumented, who would be impacted. A third of farm workers are here in California. So it is a huge percentage of farm workers who are here in the state. And so right now, this stakeholder agreement, as we call it, that the UFW negotiated with the ag industry really says that farm workers would have a path to citizenship, that they would first have to demonstrate that they'd worked 100 days at some point between 2011 and 2012, and that they would be able to have access to temporary residence, and then they'd be able to apply for permanent residence after working for at least 100 days per year for 3 years, or 150 days per year for 5 years. So they'd be on a quicker path to citizenship. But we also know that they're working incredibly hard in the fields right now. And so one of the things, in addition, although this is certainly an issue that for us has been very difficult to negotiate, and I know the employers and the UFW had over a dozen negotiating sessions this year, and this issue of guest workers is something that's included. We would have a new guest worker program with protections that we negotiated for workers, and it also has a more streamlined process for employers. However, at hand, we now have Congressman Goodlatte, who is now proposing and has now passed through the Judiciary Committee in the House, a bill that is, to us, worse than the Bracero legislation. It really would lower wages that are already low for farm workers. It would impact farm workers in many, many ways. Those that are already here, who, according to Goodlatte, would now be would have to self-deport, basically. They'd have to go back to their country, and if they'd want to, they could become guest workers with no path to citizenship in the future. This is unacceptable to us, and we certainly know that in the agreement that we have with the employers, that they have agreed that they are going to oppose the Goodlatte legislation. So we really want to ensure that the House members know that we need comprehensive immigration reform. The piecemeal legislation that the House Judiciary Committee is coming up with is unacceptable. We need to ensure that we have citizenship, and that really is the question at hand right now. As Angelica Salas mentioned, who's one of our partners at the national level and here at the state level, Congressman McCarthy is huge here in the state. He is our majority whip. Although he says, "Why are you targeting me?" sometimes, clearly, he's in the leadership. Clearly, he's in the state with the largest number of farm workers. He's in a state with the largest number of immigrants. And so we want to ensure that he hears a clear message, that California needs comprehensive immigration reform, and that he is in the leadership and that we're going to hold him accountable. So we want to ensure that this question of how we should proceed and how we go to conference is the fact that we need a vote on citizenship. And as majority of whip, he knows that we can get something through. And the Senate bill has bipartisan support. It has the support from many, many organizations. And if AG can come together with the United Farm Workers and agree on something, we're sure that we can come up with something in the House. So we want to make sure that the pressure is being felt from all areas. And so this is a very timely discussion, and appreciate the fact that you all are holding this hearing. We did bring some materials, so if you'd like to have any more information about the bill that Congressman Goodlatte is proposing specific to farm workers, and as I would call it, the Bracero legislation. We do have some of that material. And I'd also like to say that we had a huge caravan, and I know that Angelica and many other organizations participated this month. The whole state, many, many organizations, labor came down to our backyard. The United Farm Workers happens to be our headquarters are in Kevin McCarthy's district. So we had many, many guests who came, hundreds and hundreds of people. We had farm workers from 13 different farm worker communities, all the way up from Santa Rosa down to Oxnard. And we really need to continue that type of pressure, but at the same time, we look to decision makers as well to put that pressure on. So thank you so very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Torres. We can move forward, Mr. Garcia, and then we'll raise some questions. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasant surprise. I had heard that you weren't going to be able to make it, but thank you for being here, Mr. Garcia.
Sure. I think the moment is upon all of us right now, so I felt an obligation to be here and talk to you. I want to thank you, Manny, and Senator Lara for putting this together. It really draws attention and shines a light on the most important social issue of our time. And we are so close to finally legalizing the major share of the 11 million hardworking immigrants in this country that I think all can relate to or connect to in one way or another, especially the Latino caucus. What I'm going to talk about is about perspective from labor organizing, not from an organizer's perspective. And we can listen to the activists and the pundits on the bill till the cows come home. But I don't have enough time in my life to wait for the perfect bill to be passed through the Congress. Now's the time where we've come very, very close, and we are very, very close. And just listening to the individuals around the room from business, their support is music to my ears to hear, the high-tech industry, the grower industry, the hotel industry, and construction industry all come together and want to work together with the immigrant rights and labor groups to finally win comprehensive immigration reform so we all get what we need out of it and what we believe will provide justice for our workforce. But everybody shares one thing. The human lives that are involved, and our local union is highly immigrant, highly undocumented, and, as Lorena knows, we are subject to a lot of enforcement issues that have cost thousands of our members' jobs, divided thousands of families, and ruined lives of many, many of our janitors over the last few years across the state. So this is a very personal issue for us, and we can't lose track, in spite of all the politics and all the rhetoric, that we must do everything we can to win all we can, and think like organizers here, which is we win what we fight for. And this is what I teach my members. This is what I teach everyone around me, that it's a fight. And as long as we fight and we fight together, we will win together. And we're so close right now. Really, how this relates to labor and immigration connect, it is one in the labor movement. When you look at the economic disparity, the huge and growing economic disparity in this country that is growing and growing, you look at the economic patterns, you look at the economic structures of this country as businesses move towards a contingent workforce, an outsourced workforce, temporary employment agencies, contracting out their responsibilities to workers, contracting out their responsibility to provide health care and living wages to workers is on the rise and on the increase. In Alameda County, these low-wage jobs have increased by 30% and are now 25% of the workforce. In LA County, already the low-wage worker capital of the world, it's risen 7% in the last year, and it's now 39% of the workforce. Sacramento's risen 52% these jobs, and it's now 31% of its employment structure. The Department of Labor predicts that in about 6 short years, the majority of the American workers will be working in these low-wage contingency jobs or retail jobs without hope, without health care, without a union. And that's where our economy is going. That's where America is going. And the immigration piece of this is vitally connected to that. Labor has historically been at the center of improving quality of life for immigrant workers and future generations that have created a great middle class in this country before it had been systematically dismantled. Meanwhile, corporate wealth is on the rise, $8 trillion in profits. They're sitting on $2.2 trillion of cash. $2.2 trillion of cash as we sit here today. So the money is there. It is just not fairly and equally distributed, unfortunately. And immigration reform will change that. It will bring wealth and it'll bring prosperity to our communities. It'll bring citizenship and ability for people to participate in civic participation and make decisions that affect their lives and their livelihoods. The California economic boost will be $8 billion to $327 billion in revenue. So there's a lot of money we're talking about here if these workers are given the right to provide for their fair share. It creates enduring prosperity and pathway to economic recovery and to rebuild public budgets. And it revitalizes communities. When there are good jobs, when the workforce is stabilized, they're able to work in better jobs. And this is how it connects to labor organizing. And with labor working together with the immigrant community, we can create good jobs, union jobs, like our parents had when we had a strong and vital labor movement. We had a strong and vital middle class that was contributing robustly to our economy, consuming, buying houses, buying school clothes, buying cars, buying products for their family. The economy was robust. When working people don't have the ability to consume, the economy is in a spiraling, will continue to spiral down and create more of this economic despair on our communities. The Latino community, in particular, and on all working class communities, suffer the most because these are the folks that are in these jobs. And these are the folks, and immigrant workers have been the ones that have taken most advantage of and by their employers to create these jobs that creates poverty and creates a community that is rife with crime and poor education and no opportunity for our youth. So the immigration reform for the labor movement is vital. It's vital to uplifting our economy. It's vital to rebuilding the middle class. It's vital to creating good jobs and more good jobs for American working people. And it's a pathway as well to creating the public resources we need to help lift us up out of our economic budget crises that we endure every day. That's not to say that corporate America doesn't have its obligation to pay its fair share too, because we feel very strongly that that must happen as well. But give working people, give these immigrants, there's 2 million folks out there, the ability to pay their fair share. They're ready to stand up and pay their fair share and challenge business to pay their fair share. They just need legal status and stability, as the gentleman here from the ag business stated, stability in their lives to be able to do that. So I can't tell you enough as a labor leader how important and how connected the labor movement is to the immigrant rights struggle in the work of the Latino Caucus, because I know it's an issue that impacts us all and we feel deeply personal about. But we are one on this, and we are one with business. And I applaud you for bringing these business gentlemen together and make the statements they made today. I think were absolutely phenomenal, and how they have turned around and realized that even immigration reform and legalizing these folks is going to benefit their own businesses and the economy as well. So it's just a question of what more do we need to do to make this happen. And specifically, we have several weeks to go, and the battle is on in Congress. We have, 33 Republicans in California, or 33 congressmen in California, and we have our share of Republicans. And I'm not here I'm bipartisan today, but there's a lot of Republican brothers that want to join our cause. So what do we need to do to help them get there in their debate that is raging in their party? And I think that's really what this comes down to. And if we have relationships with any of these folks that are still undecided on this issue in Congress, we need to exercise our relationships. And we all have relationships in business. We have relationships on each side of the aisle. We need to move those relationships and say, let's do this now. Comprehensive immigration reform, not piecemeal, but comprehensive. It is there for us. It's close for us. And I can guarantee you that the major share of these 11 million folks will be legalized, lives will be stabilized, their jobs will be stabilized, and the families will be stabilized. And that's really what this is about, the human lives that we're trying to impact here in our grasp. It'll never be a perfect bill, and the intellectuals can debate this till the cows come home, but I'm not an intellectual, I'm an organizer, and I call on you all to join us and think of what we can do to move those conversations within our parties, within our relationships, both sides of the aisles, and in business, that we need comprehensive immigration reform. The business community won't get what they want unless they agree to the bigger picture. We won't get what we want unless we understand there's some business needs that must be addressed. Let's work together and let's get this done. And whatever you can do between now and the next few weeks, let's do it. We've changed the debate in this country. We've got the momentum. Now let's bring it home. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Let me just say, first and foremost, thank you to all of you. Mr. Garcia, President of CIU, Caitlin Vega, legislative advocate as well for California Labor Federation, and Diana Teosan Torres, national vice president, United Farm Workers Union. Muchas gracias. Thank you, all of you, for your presentation, your testimony. I want to open it up to the dais here, to our members. In case there's a question, Ms. Gonzalez.
Thank you. Obviously, I know firsthand the issues that immigrants face, especially when trying to organize or facing a contract dispute in their workplace. And of course, in San Diego, we had 9 hotel workers fired when they tried to form a union based on their immigration status. That, you know, clearly after 10 years, I guess the employer figured out that maybe the documentation wasn't quite right. I do wonder, and Mr. Garcia, I'm so glad to see you here. It's been months, but with our janitors in San Diego, you know, we had hundreds of janitors, of course, lose their jobs after the E-Verify. Will their negative, I guess, position during the E-Verify audits put them at risk for not being able to qualify under the current proposal for any kind of legalized status? I don't know if...
Well, we are told that it will not, that as soon as, the minute the bill is passed, those people will fall under the protected status of applying for legal status. So they should be okay.
I'm an organizer, not a caseworker, but I still worry about those folks, so...
Any other questions from the dais? Mr. Dolly?
Well, the Republicans have been mentioned quite a bit today, so I thought maybe I should say something. I'm a farmer, and I also served 16 years on a board of supervisors, and so, you know, as an employer, it's you know, there's been some talk about, you know, policy and politics, and for the last 16 years that I've been in trying to do this, they have to meet somewhere, though, because they do drive each other. And I think that's where we're at today. I think we're close to that point, and I'm hoping that we can get to where we can make it so that not only as an employer, I love the workers I have, and it's hard to obey, to you know, work within the law, because as an employer, sometimes you get bad information from the people you're trying to hire, and you don't know whether they're legal or illegal, but you definitely want them to work. And then on the other side of it, you know, we see the families torn, and I tell you, I have the same story that Ian has, Mr. Calderon. I have friends that I grew up with who, you know, didn't know if they came home, if their families were going to be there, or whether they could stay in America as citizens too. So it's touching on both sides, but there is an opportunity here, I believe, and I will work as hard as the rest of the Latino Caucus on trying to educate members in the House on, you know, that hopefully we can come to the point where we have policy and politics meet, where we can make something happen. And that's really, I think, the gist of what this conversation is about, because I think we're close to that. And hopefully we can get there, and I will do what I can to provide leadership. Thank you for, I want to just thank the Latino Caucus and for putting this together. I think is a great opportunity.
And just to add one more point, not to belabor the point about what some of my Republican colleagues have been doing. Senator Anthony Cannella and Jeff Correll did a trip also to D.C. To lobby their colleagues in the Republican caucus there, including some of the key California Republican members, to pass immigration reform. So I remember 20 years ago as a young teenager during Prop 187, when we were under attack during that horrible initiative. Now to be seeing Republican colleagues now supporting a call for comprehensive immigration reform, and then even doing trips, was something that we wouldn't imagine 20 years ago as a young teenager, a young community organizer. So I appreciate those efforts, but I have to commend my colleagues when they're doing the right thing, and we could work on a very critical issue of our times here in California. I have to commend them for doing that effort, and Mr. Dolly is one of those. So thank you, though, for your leadership, and look forward to keep working together on this critical issue right now.
So I want to raise a question. I think we all obviously are in agreement that we need comprehensive immigration reform. But I guess ultimately, at the end of the day, do we actually know what that really means? Right? It could mean certain things for labor, and for the immigrant rights advocates, it can mean something totally different or something in between. And so is SB 744 a short-term or a long-term fix? Knowing that it's always been the effort by our advocates as well as by labor that we need a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million people, not for the 5 or for the 6, that the current proposal allows for citizenship. And so that would be, I guess, one of my questions is this a short-term or a long-term fix? Does it get to what it is that we're searching for, which is ultimately a pathway to citizenship? And with that, does SB 744 also address the issue of securing U.S.-born workers, right? Versus a continuance of a guest worker program, right? So I just want to raise that out loud and let's have some discussion.
Well, I mean, we all want the perfect immigration reform bill. That's no question. But when it gets put through the political process and the political hopper, we're dealing with the rest of the country, with Congress folks and senators that represent folks like Ohio and Virginia and very conservative states that are not so familiar with the immigrant community as we are. And it becomes much more difficult. And that's just a practical reality where we did it. If we did it now, if we could do it 10 years from now, if we did it years past, it's just the world as it is. But it is a world that is gradually changing. And in terms of your question, specifically to your question, what I understand, the immigrant community, and from my perspective, and you know, we have 40,000 members, their first and foremost objective is legalization. They want their jobs and their livelihoods stabilized and their families secure. First and foremost, that's what they want. They want to stop the deportations on their families. They want to stop the enforcement I-9 verification on their jobs and losing their health insurance and losing their ability to provide for their family. First and foremost, the major share of the 11 million folks, from my understanding, will become legalized and will be legal as soon as the bill is passed as they apply for this legalization process. The citizenship process is much more complicated politically, and there's going to be compromise. That's just life. If we get 4 to 5 million new citizens out of it, that's a start. And what's important is that we have changed the political climate in this country. 70% of the polling of folks that polled, from whatever poll that I've seen, show support for immigration reform. So we've changed the mindset of America, which is important to know that as we move forward, people are going to be much more open and people are going to be much more supportive of immigration reform and citizenship of these things. I think that the folks that might be caught up on it right now are going to move on to other things. But I think immigration reform, we've changed the debate, we've changed the mindset. That's a huge accomplishment, and the momentum we have will continue to plow forward to continue to make improvements, you know, over the years. We're happy with it at SCIU. We're happy with it at our local, because we know our folks' livelihoods, and a good 60% of our janitor division is undocumented, will be stabilized. And we share all the stories, all of you, going to work, broken families, tears, crying, you know, people losing their jobs, people being deported, people having ICE agents show up at their houses, arresting them. It's horrible. This is not the America we should be striving for. And this bill will clean a major share of that up for those 11 million folks. So I think we need to be positive. I don't think now's the time to be indecisive. The bill is the bill. Let's get as much as we can win out of it, and let's bring it home. I don't know that our community, Latino community, is divided. The activists and intellectuals might be divided on this bill, but in the Latino community that I know, my family members, my members, you know, all the community organizations I work for, I don't see a division on this bill, and they want as much respect and dignity and justice as they can achieve in this bill, and their hopes are riding high on this bill. And we can't disappoint them. That's my view.
When it comes to the farm worker component, you know, I think one of the huge issues as the UFW was negotiating the bill was the provisions for the ag component in SB 744 was to ensure that farm workers, professional farm workers who are currently here in the country working, who know what they're doing, are not displaced. And so as we were having discussions about the guest worker program and what it could look like, that was a huge component of the work, is ensuring that farm worker conditions weren't lowered from what they are now. We want to improve them, not make them worse. We don't want to have their wages dropped. We don't want to, take away the jobs that they currently have. And so that was a huge issue and something that we worked through with employers as we were negotiating this bill. So for us, this is something, it took, like I mentioned, many, many sessions of discussion. And so what we currently have in the ag provision is something that we've agreed on and that we feel we've also added protections into the guest worker program that you don't currently see in the H-2A program. And so we want to make sure that as we move forward, growers are out there lobbying with us and that we stick to the agreement that we came up with.
Thank you. Ms. Vega, did you want to?
Just quickly, I would say, I think that our position on that is, with or without the comprehensive immigration reform, there is more that California should be doing to protect immigrant workers. We believe that this bill is a top priority at the federal level, and it's not the end. Absolutely, there are many risks, just as there are these essential benefits, and we have to weigh them out, and we have to continue the fight. We can't say, well, we passed it, we won, we're done. Obviously, there's going to be some of the consequences we already know are part of a negotiated agreement, and there's going to be things we didn't foresee, and so we're going to have to keep up the fight even after we win comprehensive immigration reform.
Thank you. Mr. Alejo?
And last thing, just to add to that, as part of this comprehensive strategy on immigration reform, and as we said, we can only weigh in on what we want to see in immigration, but at the state level, as you were alluding to, there's other things that we could do to prepare and anticipate problems that might happen. My good colleague here from San Diego has a bill to address the unscrupulous lawyers and notarios that take advantage of the immigrant community during this time when, as we saw in the 80s, when they're trying to implement immigration reform, a lot of people abusing and ripping off our immigrant community. But there's other thing. Our Senator Ricardo Lara has a bill, the Office of New Americans, to help facilitate the process here in California, using our state resources to facilitate the process of them being able to apply. And another thing that we could do as a caucus too is pushing for resources to fund the adult education. That's where if they have to learn the English language, what better place to do it that facilitates their work schedule than our adult schools that our community feels comfortable with. They know where it's at, it's in the community. They can take classes in the evening. Those are all critical components, and even the citizenship classes that are offered at many of these adult schools to prepare. So while we're thinking of these tough issues and the different components of it, here in Sacramento, there's a lot of other things that we could do to prepare and facilitate that process so that our community is most successful and can meet all the requirements that are being debated currently that will be required in the end of any bill that goes forward.
Thank you, Mr. Alejo. We're going to go ahead and move forward, and thank you for your testimony. And I'd like to welcome as well Assemblymember Salas for joining us this afternoon. And if I can have the following speakers come forward. Enrique Morones, President of Border Angels. Reshma Shamasunder, Executive Director of California Immigrant Policy Center. Arturo Carmona, President of Presente.org. Efrain Delgado, Dreamer Representative from the California Dream Network. And as well Miguel Araujo, President of Centro Azteca out of the Bay Area. Can I have all you come forward, please?
I want to welcome my former Assembly fellow colleague, Arturo Carmona, who we were Assembly fellows about 11 years ago this year. So good to see you again.
Thank you, Luis.
So, Enrique, if I could have you speak first, and then Reshma, and then Arturo, Efrain, and then Miguel. That'd be great. And then from there, we'll go ahead and have some Q&A.
Buenas tardes, and thank you, members of the Latino Caucus and friends all.
Mr. Morones, before you actually start, I apologize, but we have a visitor here, a special guest that just came in. He's right behind you. Our governor, Mr. Jerry Brown. Come on up, Mr. Brown. Governor? You like to present, Governor? Say a few words.
I'll say a very few words. It is rare that I come to this august chamber, but the cause is just and the timing is right, and it's crucial for California's well-being that we get immigration reform. There are a number of Republicans in the House who are within our state, and some of them have come along, and now we have to make sure we get a few more. This is crucial to lots of people, certainly and foremost the people involved who are living in the shadows, who have come here under various conditions for various reasons and for various lengths of time, but almost all of whom are contributing to our well-being and to our future. So for California, immigration reform, a path to citizenship, makes all the difference in the world. It will strengthen our economy, strengthen our communities, protect families and their values and their future. So there are very few people against this in California. So we have to, in some way, influence people outside of our state, although we got a few congressmen that we could influence. And when you get the farm workers and the farmers and the Silicon Valley technocrats and Republicans and just a lot of ordinary people saying this is right, and then you get the religious groups, this is a tidal wave that is building its momentum, and we need to sweep it right through Bakersfield all the way to Washington, D.C. I hope everything you're doing here today contributes to that, and I want to associate myself with almost all the remarks that have been made. I say almost because I didn't hear them all, but I'm sure with very few minute exceptions I would agree. So good luck, and I've already been talking to Eliseo Medina about some various strategies on what we need to do next, and you can count on me to be where you need me.
Thank you, Governor. As the Vice Chair of Latino Caucus, our Senator Ricardo Lara, our Chairman, was here as well, and then the members of Latino Caucus, we appreciate you being here. Mr. Daly as well is here on behalf of the Republican Party. A few others were here on behalf of the Republican Party. Your name has come up quite a bit in a good way, and I want to let you know that we'll be following up and love to sit down with you and give you a report, and then from there talk about next steps.
Well, it is significant that you have Republicans supporting this, both elected and people in the community. We've seen some bipartisan efforts on our workers' compensation bill. We had a number of Republicans that joined Democrats. Today we had a press conference with the Republican leader in the Senate and the Assembly, joining with Speaker Perez in supporting some responses to the court order on our prison system. So there are increasing numbers of examples in California where Republicans and Democrats come together, and also on the local student formula, because it turned out that, yes, people in cities, big cities like Los Angeles and Oakland, San Francisco have problems, but so do people throughout the valley in terms of language, in terms of lack of real economic opportunity, and therefore the idea of putting more money in those communities where the families are not as economically advantaged, and more money in those areas where the families don't start with English as their first language. That got an agreement that went beyond the Democratic Party. In fact, there are a few Democrats who opposed it, I think. No, not too many at the end. But that's good. So I think these big issues, I don't like to use the word moral because it gets to be such a loaded term, but big human issues that encompass a lot of different perspectives. That's what immigration is. And they're high-tech people. They have a very different perspective than the United Farm Workers. And some of the farmers, they have a very different perspective than Art Pulaski and the AFL-CIO. So you have people who really differ, but on this issue, they see a common human dimension, and that's why it's so powerful. And the more we can keep it at that high level, the more embracing we will be of all the diversity. We don't all have to agree on, we can agree on this and then save time to argue about something else later. But that's the power of this issue, that it encompasses so many diametrically opposed kinds of positions, all coming together. And I like to think of something that the great Jesuit, I have to quote it, obscure Jesuit, Pierre de Chardin, says that everything that rises converges. So as we kind of get a little higher in our thinking, there's a convergence. If we keep down in the weeds, we fight a lot more. So, and that guy was a smart guy.
Well, thank you, Governor Brown. A round of applause, please, for our governor.
Thank you for the letter when you sent it to the Senator Feinstein. That's very good. Yes. That's very good.
Don't forget, before we were us, we were them. Before we were us, we were them.
That's yours now, Governor. You can take that with you. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Governor, for coming. We appreciate it. On behalf of Latino Caucus, I appreciate you being here. And we're going to continue the conversation. We'll follow up with you. Thank you. Enrique, sorry for that interruption there, but I think it was a good one for us to have. And please, by all means,
Absolutely.
provide your testimony.
Well, members of the Latino Caucus, friends all, thank you for the opportunity to share with you briefly a little bit about the human rights aspect of this issue. My name is Enrique Morones. I'm the founder of an organization that we started 27 years ago called Ángeles de la Frontera, or Border Angels. We're best known for putting water in the desert so that people don't die, but we do a lot more than that. We started in the canyons of North County, where people live before there was a wall. And they live, a lot of these people would work in the farms and the fields of North County, San Diego. And then we expanded our efforts to going out into the Imperial Valley. And you've been with us. You've been with us when we've done our national caravans across the country, and we're not going to forget that. Let's also remember that tomorrow is the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. And not only did Martin Luther King have a dream, but we also have a dream. We also have a dream, and what we want is humane immigration reform. I haven't heard that word today too much. We don't want just comprehensive immigration reform. We want humane immigration reform. Before 1994, which was a watershed year in this issue, you had the passing of a very hateful bill promoted by the then governor of California, Pete Wilson, Proposition 187. You had the North American Free Trade Agreement. You had the Zapatista movement because people said, hey, we need to be able to live off the land. And you had something that has greatly impacted immigration to this day, and the whole world has seen it. It's called Operation Gatekeeper. A wall was built between San Diego and Tijuana, the two biggest border cities. And I'll never forget what a previous president said in the 1980s. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Yet in 1994, the U.S. government puts up a wall. Before that wall was built, 1 or 2 people would die crossing the border before there was a wall. Since 1994, when that wall was first built on October 1st, 10,000 human beings have died. 10,000 human beings have died because of that wall. And it's not just a number. Marco Antonio Villaseñor was one of those people. He was a 5-year-old little boy that crossed for the number one reason all of us in this room are here today. Our parents wanted us to have a better life. And he crossed with his dad, and as he crossed with his dad, he became very thirsty. And he asked his father for some water. But his father wouldn't give him any water. So he asked the next man and the next. He asked 18 men for water. Neither would give the boy water. And why not? They were already dead. 19 human beings perished in Victoria, Texas in May of 2003. But it's not only boys and men, it's also women, because the number 2 reason people come here is family reunification. They want to be with their loved ones, like Lucrecia Dominguez wants to be with her husband. And she, like the 19 people that died in Victoria, Texas, and the 10,000 people that have died since 1994, have no line to get into. There is no Statue of Liberty for them. No, give me your poor, you're tired, you huddled masses. They have a wall. And people are forced to go around, over, and under this wall, dying every day. Lucrecia crosses with her son Jesus, 15 years old, and Nora, 7. And Lucrecia, after the smuggler abandoned her, literally dies in the arms of Jesus, her 15-year-old son, Jesus. This is happening every day. When we had the firestorm in 2007, right here in California, Guadalupe Beltran went home to bury her mother. And when she came back, the smuggler says, cross now, the Border Patrol will be busy with the fire. So she crossed. They didn't find her for 4 days. In the hospital, totally charred. Her husband could not recognize her, leaving behind 4 orphan children. But they don't only die crossing the border, they die once they're here. Luis Ramirez, brutally beaten to death in Shenandoah, Pennsylvania, simply because he was Mexican and his wife was white. Marcelo Lucero kicked to death when 7 good Americans wanted to have a beaner boot party. They find him in Long Island, New York, and they kill Marcelo Lucero. He's not from the great country of Mexico. He's from the great country of Ecuador. But all of these people, whether they're from Zacatecas or they're from wherever, Zimbabwe, they're human beings. They're human beings. And what we have going on now, we have an immigration bill that's being proposed, and the Senate added some deadly amendments at the end. My dad passed away 3 weeks ago. My dad was Aztec Indian. And the Aztecs, in their history, used to have human sacrifices. What this immigration bill will do, as it is now, will be committing people to a death sentence. 10,000 people is not enough? If you double the wall from 700 miles to 1,400, which is what they propose, it's a 2,000-mile border, you're going to have more deaths. If you double the Border Patrol from 20,000 to 40,000, you're going to have more Anastasio Hernandezes, Sergio Hernandez, Marco Antonio Villaseñor, more people that are killed by Border Patrol. We cannot accept that part of the bill. We cannot accept it. I like what Peter Shea said, and he might be the best analyst in this room. And Peter Shea mentioned that an incremental immigration bill is the best way to go. I know it'd be great if the 11 million people had, we're not looking for legalization, first of all. There's no human being that's illegal. We're looking for documentation. So if these 11 million have a pathway to documentation, let's do it in a humane way. When our African-American brothers and sisters 50 years ago marched on Washington, they weren't saying, okay, we're going to give you the right to vote, but you have to sacrifice 300 people every year. They would have said no. And we need to stand up and say no, because what happened in 1994 with Operation Gatekeeper, that has been a death sentence. And this new bill, as it is now, with the amendments in the Senate, and we know Congress is going to be worse, is a guaranteed death sentence. We cannot accept that part of the bill. So what we're saying is we have been across the country. We've done 8 national marches. Like I said, Manu, you participated in one of them. We cannot have this type of a bill being presented to us and then people saying, well, we want the bill because it's going to give a pathway to 11 million. It's not going to give a pathway to 11 million. Only half the people qualify as it is now. So if we do the incremental bill that Peter Shea and Arnoldo were talking about, the people already in the pipeline, the dreamers, the DACA, the ag jobs people, let them have a pathway to documentation. I'm out there. I pick up the dead bodies. I talk to the woman whose son is lost in the desert, and sometimes we find him when it's too late. I'm with these families. I'm on the front lines. Not one of these people has ever said anything about citizenship. They're not looking for citizenship. They're looking to be documented. They don't want to have a crazy Joe Arpaio here, and we have crazy Joe Arpaios here in California. They want to have a way in which they can come out of the shadows and feed their families. There's 250 million undocumented people in the world. We only have 11 million. Most aren't in this country. We have 11 million. And of that 11 million, approximately 40% came with a visa. They qualified for visas. They're not from Latin America, Asia, Europe, people with money. Student work and tourist visas, and their visas expired, and they stayed. They're undocumented. The other 60% are the people crossing in the desert. The 5 people that died 2 days ago on the train from southern Mexico to northern Mexico in La Bestia, that's happening not only on this side of the border, but also on the other side of the border. And we as a people have got to practice what we preach. We're all of the same race, the human race. And if the United States wants to go around the world and talk about human rights, they need to practice them right here at home. And we're not doing that. So we say, ni una muerte más. Queremos reforma de migración que sea digna y humana. We need to have humane immigration reform. Because when the forefathers of those people that came through Ellis Island came, the United States had nothing to do with the potato famine or the religious persecution going on in Europe. But the people coming from Latin America today, the United States has a lot to do with it. Whether it was Reagan intervention in Central America, whether it's the free trade agreements, whether it's the United States with 4% of the world's population demanding more than half of the world's illegal drugs consuming more than a third of the world's natural resources? That is not right. We're only 4.5% of the world's population. We have no right to have that superior type of attitude to anybody. The March on Washington taught us that we're all human beings. We're all the same race. And we have advanced somewhat, but we've gone backwards somewhat. We see a rise in hate crimes. We see some of this legislation that's still being manifested across the country. We need to speak out because California is the leader in this issue. And unfortunately, we've led in the wrong direction, like with Proposition 187, but we can also lead in the correct direction. So I think it's important that the Latino Caucus stand up to this injustice of the additional wall, of the additional border patrol, and say, if we can't take that out, then we want to have the incremental immigration reform. And let's have the new president in a couple of years really give us humane immigration reform, because we're not going to forget about the other people. We're not going to forget about them. We've got to include them. But we got to stop just accepting anything. We've got to stop that. And I know all of you have a good heart about this issue. And the people that have spoken before me, I know they also have a good heart. But we're on the front lines. We are the ones that are with the family. So I brought a book with some of the stories, which I gave you all. And I want to tell you that these 10,000 people that have died, and that person that's dying right now, that's crossing a border right now, simply because he wants to feed his family, wants to be with his loved one, wants to be able to have an opportunity because he's being persecuted because of the violence, because of the drug war. No son olvidados. We cannot forget these people. These are human beings. These are human beings, and we will not accept a death sentence. So this immigration reform bill, the way that it is now, I'm sorry, we cannot accept it. We and a lot of the activist community, I know there's divided opinions on this, but I think it's important that we have humane immigration reform. When millions of us marched in the immigrant spring of 2006, nobody was marching for more Operation Gatekeeper. So we need to have that heard loud and clear. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morales, for your testimony. Appreciate it. May we have Reshma Shamasunder, please speak, Executive Director of California Immigrant Policy Center.
Hi, good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to present today, and I also want to thank the Latino Caucus for putting together this important event. I also want to thank all my co-presenters today, because I think we've had so many people in this room who've been champions for immigrant rights and immigration reform for so long. So a lot of the speakers have already given an excellent overview of the political environment, of what's happening in Congress. I think that one thing I want to add before coming back to this later is that I think it is critical for California to have a very loud voice on this issue. We have to be the loudest, given that we have the most undocumented immigrants in the country. Maybe a little bit counterintuitively, I do briefly want to talk about some state issues, and I know we've brought it up here, and it's a perfect time given that Mr. Jerry Brown was just here. But when we speak about the immigrant rights movement here in California, and this panel is kind of about immigration reform and the immigrant rights movement, we have a really amazing movement in the state. We have regional coalitions in almost every part of the state popping up all the time. We have vocal faith leaders, we have diverse networks of fearless dreamers, and we have countless immigrant organizations that serve diverse populations that really reflect the diversity of California. Those that serve Mexicans, to Central Americans, to African Americans, African immigrants, to Southeast Asian immigrants. And so I think as we talk about immigration reform and immigrant issues, it's also really important to take a look at what have been some of the priorities of California's immigrant rights movement. And in addition to pushing for immigration reform over the last many years and making that one of their top priorities, state issues are also very critical. And as we await immigration reform, and even when it passes, we need protections in place here in California to ensure that immigrants, either as they wait for reform or as they are left out of reform, which there are going to be some people left out of reform, some, many, we don't know, we need to continue to be being a welcoming place here in California. So I think, as was mentioned before, the Trust Act, which is currently in the state Senate and moving to the governor's desk. When the governor came here, I did whisper Trust Act, but I wish I had shouted it out loudly the way that Angelica did, because I think those are the voices that we need now. We need to pass the Trust Act here in California, and thank you to the Latino Caucus members who have been a champion of this bill. We're in the home stretch, and this would make a momentous change. It would change the way that local law enforcement deals with immigration authorities or ICE, and it would take us a big step forward in helping those who are cited for small violations like traffic tickets or selling tamales to support their family from being deported, unjustly detained or deported, and so this is critical. I also just want to recognize, some of the other great bills that we have moving here in California, the state driver's license bill that Assemblymember Alejo has championed so bravely, and I think that's critical to giving our communities the protection they need when they're pulled over by local law enforcement, both so their cars are not unnecessarily impounded, but more importantly that they have an ID that they can show that may stop them from entering the detention and deportation pipeline. SB 23, as Senator Lara mentioned, and finally, just kind of a shout out for healthcare reform and our need as California to be a real leader around healthcare for all as we're moving forward healthcare reform implementation. So that's, I think, just kind of brief context in terms of the state, because there is so much we can do as a state. We can be a shining example, but I think, as others have been saying, change must occur at the federal level. That's where immigration reform needs to happen. That's where change needs to happen. So, of course, we and most other immigrant rights groups have turned much of our attention to the federal issues as well. And as we think about what's best for California, the diverse voices we've had here today, I think in some ways what's so difficult about this issue is that so many of today's speakers have a good point. And I think we're all fighting for the same thing, but given where we are in the process, I think looking at the broader context is really critical. And, we as the California Immigrant Policy Center, we, are fighting for a broad pathway to citizenship like everyone else, but I think we're also very, very concerned that there not be heavy enforcement provisions, whether it's on the border or whether it's on the interior, that really takes us backward as a state and as a country. And I think there are ways to push forward for proactive immigration reform, continuing to fight for a good bill in the House, bringing the Senate bill to a vote in the House, urging our House gang of 7 to introduce their bill. So there is definitely room for proactive reform even at this juncture. I don't think, maybe some of the other speakers are saying there's not, but we believe that there is. But within that context, looking at what's moving through the House, and I think others have spoken about it, we're particularly opposed to things like the SAFE Act, the Legal Workforce Act, and other terrible House bills that would do things like, advance policies such as criminalizing people who overstay a visa, subjecting criminal penalties on anyone who transports or helps an undocumented immigrant, making mandatory the Flawed E-Verify program, and requiring local law enforcement to provide information about anyone apprehended to federal immigration authorities, which would broadly expand the role of local and state government in immigration policy. So we're a part, and I think Arturo may talk more about this, but we're the field partner, the California field partner of a national campaign called the Cambio campaign, which is really monitoring and speaking out around enforcement, border, and worker protection issues. And we have seen our role here in California, while our federal partners are really doing, the advocacy in DC, as bolstering our California leaders who have been champions of reform. We have great leaders here in California who can speak out, who can be vocal about trying to strip out negative provisions around, any final immigration reform bill that is moving forward, whether it's, no more enforcement, no more drones at the border, no more, huge budget at the border. So the things that we have focused on is really through media, through legislative visits, but also through just interaction, is getting our folks like, Speaker Pelosi, Lofgren, Becerra. We have so many folks to really get them to be vocal. And so I was thinking, as you were asking what the Latino Caucus could do, I think it could be a multi-pronged strategy. I think it makes sense to push on the Republicans to support a broad pathway to citizenship. That's critical. But I think also urging our Democratic leadership and our Democratic leaders to hold the line on some of the negative provisions, and perhaps even, putting in a letter to President Obama on, intermediate DACA-like action. I think there might be many strategies the Latino Caucus can take, and I think as California we have to be bold, and I think this gives us the opportunity to be bold. And, I think it's it's just critical for us to realize that the inclusion of these terrible provisions would take us back in California. And so, just in closing, you know, I'd like to say that we have an opportunity to demonstrate that we can lead, both through visionary pro-immigrant policies that we're already moving here in California, but also vocal opposition against federal efforts to make the lives of immigrants miserable, and to be a champion and maintain that drumbeat for real, fair, meaningful, humane reform. Thank you.
Thank you, Reshma, for your presentation. Before we move on to our next presenter, Arturo Carmona, president of Presente.org, I want to welcome Ms. Cheryl Brown of the San Bernardino area. Thank you, Assemblywoman, for being here with us. Appreciate you being here with us.
Thank
You have some fans out there, Ms. Brown.
you. Hey, that's great.
Well, thank you, Ms. Brown, for being here with us. Arturo Carmona, will you be able to provide testimony?
Thank you, Assemblyman Perez. I first want to also join everyone else in congratulating the California Latino Legislative Caucus for putting this hearing together. I think it's exciting to see there's a strong interest in discussing the issue, and more importantly, being a strategic pressure point for good pro-migrant legislation, as Resma alluded to in her concluding thoughts. God knows that we need more leadership statewide on the issue, not only to provide relief to undocumented immigrants from local, federal, and state police agencies, but also to show a clear, more progressive path for rejecting the notion of deportation and embracing immigrant integration. I want to say that the issue of immigration reform is not an issue about left and right. It's an issue about humane versus inhumane. It's an issue about integration versus deportation. It's an issue about family unity versus family separation. And all you have to do to prove this, you have to ask the American voter. You have to ask the Latino voter, who is clearly not all on the same page on the issue of immigration. We did a poll with Latino Decisions, one of the preeminent polling firms in the nation for Latinos, and it revealed some very startling facts. The poll focused on a strong representative sample of Latino voters from across the country, and it was significant because no one had really asked Latino voters what they actually felt on, not on the top level stuff, now that we have a 1,200-page bill, but really on the facts, on the details. I really believe that, yes, we have to have the upper level conversations, but once you start getting a bill, we need to look at the details, and we need to look at the implications that has on our families. And so when you start asking those questions about the details of the bill, you start seeing some powerful findings. 73% of Latino voters strongly reject, this continual flow of immigrants being sent to detention centers and ultimately deported. 66% of Latino voters oppose ongoing raids occurring in workplaces and homes throughout our communities in California and nationally. 78% of Latino voters would not support immigration reform that does not provide a clear and expedient pathway to citizenship. 86% of Latino voters believe that immigrants should be provided an expedient pathway to citizenship in 5 years, not the current proposal that can range from anywhere from 13 to 15 years, as we heard earlier from some of the presenters. And Latinos oppose, majority of Latinos oppose the $2,000 fine that's currently in the bill, or that's currently being debated. The poll also suggests voters at 61% support LGBT inclusion, which we believe as an organization is an important factor. So, I think that this poll was very significant in the sense that it showed a lot of key positions about Latino voters that weren't out there, that aren't being discussed in the mainstream media. On the other hand, it also showed that Latinos voters are willing to compromise. 94%, for instance, support background checks, and good majorities support a rational, and I would highlight rational approach to border enforcement. The poll sends a powerful message from Latinos that, one to the Democratic Party and the President Obama, stop supporting policies that punish and deport immigrants and fight for real reform. And on the Republican side, it sends a clear message that extreme anti-immigrant policies have no place in today's political discourse. So, you know, the highest percentages of any questions point to a Latino community that does not want more policies that will persecute immigrants in this country, in the state. And the poll makes it very clear to us, and I think to you know, those folks that we have shared it with, that most Latinos don't want immigrants to wait more than 5 years. There is, in fact, a red line that shouldn't be crossed. And that's important to talk about, because once the bill passes that red line, then we need our leaders to speak out against it. And I think this poll speaks really, really to the heart of that issue. In terms of the policy and the politics moving forward, I'll be brief. I know that we've talked about it a lot today. I think that the Senate bill passed by the United States Senate has serious flaws for many of the reasons you have heard. While yes, there are very important things in the bill, the pathway to citizenship, new labor and family protections, protections for refugee and women workers. I mean, there's a long list of very positive things that we shouldn't minimize that are very significant. But you have to look at the facts. According to the Congressional Budget Office, 3.5 million, that's a third of the undocumented population, will be excluded from the legalization. That's the legalization process. That's not citizenship. So they will remain undocumented, meaning that we will have millions remaining on undocumented status and deportations continuing in our communities. That's just something that we cannot accept. The citizenship provisions and process outlined in the bill, as outlined earlier today in this hearing, has transformed into a real obstacle course, which makes citizenship, the citizenship dream, an almost impossible path. And according to many experts, will exclude about half of the population from that pathway to citizenship. And so essentially the Gang of Eight bill that started kind of at a center right, that we were willing to, you know, kind of work with, guaranteeing to exclude, you know, many folks from the citizenship process as a result of a series of amendments, particularly the Corker-Hoven amendment, in our assessment, has become bordering a right-wing bill. And the Republican-controlled House is guaranteed to push the bill towards even more extremism. So we're very concerned about that. Democrats, and mainly the movement, have yet to tell us where the limits are. What are the limits that we can support? We want to know that. And so, you know, when you see Republicans like, you know, Senator Corker calling the amendment almost overkill, and John McCain saying that the most militarized borders since the Berlin Wall, and Senator Pat Leahy saying that the Corker-Hoven amendment, it's like a Christmas wish list for Halliburton. You need to begin to really look at these details. So recognizing where we're at today, after the passage of Senate Bill S-744, we believe that it's important for the legislative process to move forward. Getting members of Congress to move out and support the legalizing and pathway to citizenship of the undocumented population is important, but let's not kid ourselves. I think what we're looking at, as we've heard from many of the speakers, we're ultimately looking at a House bill that's going to be much worse. So understanding the above, that's why it's extremely important to push for more administrative and state relief. I think that states can do very concrete actions. We talked about Assemblymember Alejo's driver's license bill, the Trust Act, but also we need to, you know, I think, you know, you're seeing, you guys are following the media, you know, the projections now, you know, have the possibility of immigration reform passing, diminishing. And so we need to prepare for the reality. We need to put our feet on the ground and realize that immigration reform is going to be very difficult to pass through the House. And so we can't continue to sustain the type of deportations that are happening every day. 1,100 folks being deported every day. We need to act, and the state of California needs to play a leadership role in that. You know, so I would really urge to really escalate our fight at the state level. We need to escalate the fight for the Trust Act, for the driver's licenses. The stakes are very high for our community. So I think that I would again commend the California Latino Legislative Caucus for your leadership, and I would urge you to really elevate the voices of the Latino voter in the state. The Latino voter needs to be taken into account, needs to be listened to. More polls like this need to happen, and those interests need to be elevated not only at the federal level but at the state level. There's a lot we can do, and we need to fight harder because this is the daily life. Just this weekend, the family of a close member of mine, a friend of mine, Paco Moreno, he has extended family, and some folks might know him. They were fishing in Manhattan Beach, and they didn't have a fishing license, a couple of them. They took the whole family, including U.S. citizen children, and they put most of the family in deportation proceedings, and now they're in the process. We're, of course, trying to help them and fight for that. This is happening every day all over California, in the Coachella Valley, in the Salinas region. And so the stakes are very high, and count on us as powerful allies in trying to really escalate this. We need to fight harder here in the state. We need to fight stronger to really protect the most vulnerable, the undocumented community in our state. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Carmona. If we could move forward, Efrain Delgado, Dreamer representative from the California Dream Network, and then afterwards we'll have Miguel Araujo and a little bit of Q&A.
Yes, hello. First, I'd like to start off by saying again, my name is Efrain Delgado, and I'd like to thank you guys for inviting me and giving me the chance to speak in front of you all. I think it's very important to bring in the youth to make us comfortable, and so once we have, make us comfortable so once we are done with our studies, we're able to come into the seats that you guys are currently filling and do a good job of doing the jobs you guys are doing today. I'm a student at UC Davis right now, going into my third year. I'm the co-president of SPEAK, which is a AB 540 organization on campus. And I'm here to represent the California Dream Network. And I'll just briefly explain what the California Dream Network is to you guys. It is an organization that is statewide, which consists of different campuses across the state, which are all fighting for basic human and immigrant rights, or AB 540 students, to find a way for them to be able to attend school. And not just that, but also like basic humane rights, like the gentleman here to the side said. We're not really just in an immigrant reform, we're fighting for human rights, you know. It's not just for people like us and from other people to be able to go to school or whatever. We want to be able to have equal rights that other people in this country have, and we're currently being denied by the people who run this country. And some of the way our organization works is we have representatives from each campus, I being the one from Davis right now, where we stay in contact with other representatives, and we update ourselves with what we're doing for immigration reform, how we're outreaching to the community and bringing in not just the students and the youth, but the parents of the youth to come in and help with the immigration reform. And to list a few of the things that we do as a group, individually and as a statewide organization, we've taken it upon ourselves to bring in, like I just stated earlier, not just the youth, but the parents and the people who came to this country to make a better life for their children, because it's also very vital to have them helping us in the reform. We outreach to them. We post out at flea markets, grocery stores, different places like that. We give out flyers to people, inviting them to community forums where we inform them about the immigration reform, because it's unfortunate, but a lot of the Latino community and a lot of the immigrant community is uninformed about how things work here in the Capitol and at the federal level. So at those community forums, we update them about how things work, how bills are written, how they're presented, and how they're voted through legislation. And so we hold those. And then at a few places up here in the northern region of California, we've been able to maintain a consistent flow of people to help us out through being members of community member groups. So like in Stockton and Tracy, we have parents and community leaders where they're helping us push for the kind of forums and stuff we want to bring in people to make the cause even bigger and make our voices heard. We also like to target Republican districts, because as we know, a lot of the Democrats are already in favor of the immigration reform and fighting for immigrant and human rights. But it's a lot of the Republicans that are going to be the votes that kind of push the thing in the right direction that we want. And what we do when we target these Republicans is we do ledge visits. When we outreach to the community, we have pledge cards where we have people who live in the districts of certain Republican representatives sign and tell them that they're the people that they're representing. They need to start making decisions not just in favor of maybe the white community or the people who are citizens, but also the people who aren't documented at the moment. When we take those pledge cards, we give them to the representative if they're in office, or to their staff. And the times we've been able to do it, we've been able to represent or present them with over 500 petitions signed, which is, I think, in my opinion, very awesome, because we need to be able to show them that there's a large population of people that they need to represent that they're forgetting about. And it's a way of putting pressure on them to remember that they're representing the immigrant community. And a lot of the stuff we do is very grassroots, but just to showcase kind of the power we have as a youth organization, we were directly responsible for bringing David Valadao to a community forum where he spoke with Representative Luis Gutierrez, where they met with the immigrant community, and they basically called out the Republicans and the Democrats to work together for an immigration reform, which is huge, because nowadays you don't really see or you do, but not to the point where we'd like bipartisan cooperation between the two sides. And having David Valadao come out and speak next to Luis Gutierrez was a huge accomplishment for our organization. We also work very closely with Chirla. Angelica Salas spoke earlier. With them, we work a call center at their offices where members of the CDN, the California Dream Network, make calls to other people from across the country, not just here in California, where we inform them about what's going on with immigration reform. And then once we give them a brief update with what's going on, we connect them to their Congress members, which is another huge thing in my viewpoint, because people just don't really know that they have the power to be able to talk to their Congress members, and us going out there and informing them that they can, and informing them with stuff over the phone when we're miles away from each other, is just a sign of the strength that we have and the commitment we have to the movement. And not to move on to what we want, what's our objective as a California Dream Network.
You got about a minute.
Okay. It's indicated in our title that we're fighting for dreamers, the Dream Network, but we also want to fight for human rights. We feel that I personally feel it's ridiculous that a country that was built by immigrants and for immigrants has such ridiculous immigration laws where they're trying to take people out or keep them out because it's not to their convenience. They seem to forget their history, the history of this country, and also that they're humans and they need to feel a certain level of compassion towards each other, even if we're just from another country, because we're all at the end of the day, we're all humans, and they need us to tell them or remind them that they're humans and that immigrants are no different than they are. We're just lacking a piece of paper that they just happen to be born with.
Great final statement, Fred. We appreciate your testimony. If we could move forward with our last individual, Miguel Araujo, President of Centro Azteca.
Bien, todos hablaron inglés, yo voy a hablar español.
We're going to have translation, and that'll be from Emmanuel Martinez as well.
Quiero empezar por reconocer a aquellos hombres que en el pasado hicieron un trabajo, lucharon 1, 2 o 3 en la asamblea, como el señor Richard Polanco.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Miguel Araujo, Centro Azteca. I first want to start off by recognizing a few members of the legislature, such as
el senador Cedillo, Simón Salinas, y un asambleísta republicano que siempre estuvo de acuerdo y nos apoyó en muchas cosas, el señor Tim Leslie.
These are members of the legislature that always supported us in our efforts.
Pero hoy me siento muy orgulloso de estar con ustedes, porque bueno, en varias pláticas que tuvimos, nosotros les pedíamos esta clase de reuniones.
And today I'm very proud to be here sitting before you, because in various discussions that we've had with you all, we have asked.
Y quiero dar las gracias porque esto es lo que nos va a poner en el camino correcto y a California en el liderazgo nacional, porque ese es el lugar que a California le corresponde por el trabajo, por su dimensión y además por la gran cantidad de gente, la diversidad de gente que tenemos en este estado.
Because of the great diversity we have here in this state, we've been able to accomplish all the great things we have been able to do. That's why these discussions are very important.
Yo hago radio una vez por semana. Mi programa se llama Hablemos Claro.
I do radio once a week, and the name of my program is called Let's Speak Clearly.
Y hoy voy a tratar de expresarles un poco de lo que yo recibo, de las llamadas que recibo, las visitas que recibo, de la gente que no tiene cara, pero tiene voz.
Today I'm going to speak to you a little bit on behalf of those folks who call into my radio show, people that I speak to, who perhaps don't have a face, but do have a voice.
Pero antes quiero empezar diciéndoles que hace unos días hubo dos noticias que me impactaron muchísimo.
But before I begin, I want to first begin by telling you of some news that came out a couple days ago that impacted me deeply.
Una de ellas se dio en México, donde el tren que viene de Chiapas se descarriló en un pueblo que se llama Las Cuapas, en el estado de Veracruz, y hubo un número grande de heridos y 6 o 7 muertos.
One of the first incidents took place in the state of Veracruz, Mexico, where there was a derailment of a train, and various folks riding in that train passed away.
El tren traía varios cientos de inmigrantes de Centroamérica.
The train, on that train rode various immigrants from Central American descent.
La otra noticia es la que salió el día de ayer en varios medios, donde dicen que en la pasada administración se han deportado un poco más de 1.6 millones de inmigrantes.
The other is recent news that came out reported that the current administration at the federal level have deported more than 1.76 million immigrants.
Entre ellos el 70% aproximadamente de origen mexicano.
Among them, 70% of them of Mexican origin.
Se dice que el 60% de ellos eran criminales.
They say that 60% of them were criminals.
Pero ¿saben ustedes cómo tabulan un criminal en el Departamento de Inmigración?
But do you know how they treat a criminal in the department?
En el Departamento de Inmigración.
In the Department of Immigration?
Simplemente todo aquel que reingresa a este país que ha sido deportado, detenido en la frontera o por cualquier causa y ha sido deportado y reingresa es un criminal.
Any person who is here in this country undocumented, goes back to their country of origin and returns is considered a criminal.
Y yo quiero decirles una cosa que aprendí en el rancho.
But let me tell you something that I learned in my times at the ranch.
Una vaca, cuando la separan de su crío, se tira al río. Si el río está crecido, arriesga su vida por regresar a donde está su crío.
A cow that is separated from its herd will cross rivers and do whatever it can to get back with its herd.
No importa que muera.
Doesn't matter if the cow dies.
Entonces, esta es la situación de muchísimos padres de familia o madres de familia.
And this is a situation for many children, for many parents, for many families.
Que reingresan y reingresan y reingresan por sus hijos.
Who come back and come back and come back again to be with their children.
Y a veces pierden la vida en la frontera.
And sometimes they lose their lives at the border.
Y eso es lo grave de esta situación que estamos viviendo.
And this is how grave the situation is that we're currently living in.
Yo escucho a mucha gente en el radio
I hear a lot of people on the radio say
que me dice y que habla y que critica a muchos republicanos.
who call to critique a lot of Republicans.
Pero también escuché a muchísima gente que dijo que Ronald Reagan había dado una moratoria en las deportaciones hasta que no hubiera una ley de reforma migratoria en los 80s.
But there are also those who call and remember that Ronald Reagan passed a moratorium on deportations until there was a comprehensive immigration reform legislation passed.
Yo vine aquí con la intención de pedirles a ustedes hoy, grandes líderes que están reemplazando al señor Alejo, al señor Cedillo en la lucha por las licencias, el señor Pérez, que ha hecho un trabajo extraordinario en lo que yo considero, el señor Lara, que también ha hecho un gran trabajo.
And today I'm here to ask you, the great leaders of the state who've done a lot of work,
que están tratando de poner al Estado en el rumbo correcto,
who are working hard to put the state on the right path,
que pidan al presidente de los Estados Unidos que dé una moratoria hasta que no haya una ley de reforma comprensiva para todos.
to ask the President of the United States to put a moratorium on deportation until a comprehensive immigration legislation has passed.
Y el gobernador ha mostrado un gesto muy importante,
And the governor of the state has demonstrated a great, very important gesture today.
no solo por venir a visitarnos hoy aquí, no solo por eso,
Not just for visiting us here today,
sino porque envió una carta a los senadores de California hace algún tiempo, una carta muy importante a mi juicio, en la cual planteaba una situación muy concreta de la verdadera situación de los inmigrantes en California.
but because he sent a very important letter to the senators at the federal level that sent a very important message of our current situation.
Yo quiero pedirles a ustedes que no desmayen. Pedirles que no desmayen.
I want to ask you all to don't faint,
Que continúen adelante porque esta lucha es dura y va a ser muy dura.
to continue moving forward because this is a hard battle and it's going to continue to be so.
Pero los que tienen voz y no tienen rostro, los necesitan a ustedes.
But those that have a voice but don't have a face really need you now.
Y no permitan que se haga una ley a medias o una ley simplemente basada en intereses de política o económicos.
And don't let this comprehensive immigration reform legislation be a mediocre bill or be a legislation that is based or founded on politics, but rather
Sino basen su decisión en valores morales,
base your decisions on moral values,
humanos,
human values,
porque no se vale hablar todo el tiempo de que en muchas partes del mundo se violan los derechos de los inmigrantes.
because you can't just come up and talk that in a lot of other countries, immigrant rights are being violated.
Cuando aquí se les pisotea en una forma increíble
When here they're stepped all over in very incredible manner.
y muchos, cientos mueren todos los días en el intento de venir por la necesidad, la pobreza o la represión que viven en sus países.
And many die at the border because of their desire to come back because of the severe poverty or instability that exists in their home country.
Así que pues les pido que redoblen sus esfuerzos
So I ask you please to double up your efforts
y hagan valer la voz del Estado de California en la Unión,
and make the voice of the state of California be heard in the union,
y que se dé una moratoria para que los inmigrantes puedan, porque ahorita se están deportando a muchos de ellos que son candidatos a ser legales o ciudadanos.
for there to be a moratorium, because right now there's very many who are in the queue wanting to be legal citizens.
Y yo digo que se debería dar una moratoria, pienso yo que es no solamente de humanidad, sino moral. Y ya hay el precedente, otro presidente lo hizo, porque el presidente de ahora no podría. Solamente ustedes tienen que hacer valer la voz de los que no tienen cara.
And this is something that has been done and could be done, and can give those folks who don't have a face a voice.
Los invito cuando quieran a mi programa.
I would invite you to be on my radio show whenever you'd like.
Ya han estado algunas veces, pero los invito de nuevo.
Some of you have been there already, but I invite you once again.
También a ella.
And you too, Ms. Cheryl Brown.
Y los invito para que escuchen lo que la gente dice y le vamos a tener un intérprete a ella.
And that way you can listen to what folks have to say, and we'll even have an interpreter for you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Gracias, Miguel. Señor Rajo, por todo su trabajo que ha hecho usted también por la comunidad latina, pero también por el estado de California en total y por México también. Muchas gracias por todo lo que ha hecho. Just want to say thank you, Miguel, for all your great work that you've done on behalf of the state of California and for the Latino population, for that matter, the Mexican population. Well, let me see here. Let's. Any questions from the dais? Any thoughts, Ms. Cheryl Brown?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of this informational briefing. And thank you for the subject. Just to go and tell you, a little bit about my family. It wasn't that long ago. You mentioned Ronald Reagan. That was, for me, probably the brightest thing I can remember about Ronald Reagan is that my sister-in-law was able to now be a citizen. And she was here undocumented. My mother found her, as a matter of fact, in a park because she had come over, had no papers, had no anything, and didn't have a place to live and didn't have anything to do. My mother took her home, and she eventually became my sister-in-law. And so I know the struggle, and I know how I struggled to get her to, that was at a time whenever if you get married, you could then become a citizen. And since my brother wasn't interested at first, I set something up for her. Didn't work, but she eventually did marry my brother. And I have 2 wonderful nephews from that union, and they are still married. Another person in our family is my son-in-law, and my son-in-law just became a citizen from Honduras, and he just became a citizen probably within the last 5 years. So I know the struggle, and I know how many times he left the country and tried to get back in. And because he didn't have the documentation, he didn't have the right papers, he couldn't get back from the Caribbean. He couldn't get back from Switzerland. He couldn't get back from any of those places. Thank God for a man named Congressman George Brown who helped him get back in the country. And now, like I said, he's a citizen. So I understand the struggle. But I also understand the struggle not just with Mexican people or Hispanic people, but there are people from the Caribbean. There are people from Haiti. There are people from Africa. There are people from all over the world that are suffering the same problem. And I think that if for the movement to be successful, you got to join it together. It can't just be one country over another country, but it needs to be a process where we all come together and start working on it. And there's also some sensitivities on both sides that need to be made. And so those are the things that I want to see happen, that we can join together and make it work for all of us. I believe in win-wins. I really believe deeply in win-wins, and I believe this can be a win-win. So continue to pray, continue to fight, and continue to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. I want to move forward because we only have about 10 minutes left. Let's keep our panelists here, just in case that there is a comment that's made by the public or even from a member here. But there's a little bit of time left for public comment. Is there anyone in the audience that'd like to come up and make a comment? And if you could, put them here at that microphone there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Doug Kim with the Primary Care Association. I'll be very brief. We wanted to bring to your attention, to the Latino Caucus attention, an issue that's currently before the legislature, which we hope you can help us resolve. Under the budget provisions, as you probably know, currently legal permanent residents are eligible for full Medi-Cal benefits, and our primary care centers around the state provide those benefits to them for tens of thousands of legal permanent residents. Under the new legislation, newly eligible legal permanent residents will no longer be enrolled in Medi-Cal. They'll be enrolled in Covered California, and their benefits will be made available through the managed care plan in which they're enrolled. The legislation, as we understood it from the staff, and which has subsequently been confirmed by the staff, was to assure that there would be no loss or diminution of Medi-Cal benefits for these new legal permanent residents. Unfortunately, the director of the Department of Health Services has informed us that is not the case. New legal permanent residents will receive only restricted benefits, which he has not defined, nor has he cited the authority for suggesting that they will only receive restricted benefits. This creates a two-tier system for the current legal permanent residents and the new ones. We have submitted amendments to AB 50, which is currently on the Senate Appropriations suspense file We would respectfully request that the caucus urge your colleagues on that committee to adopt those amendments and also to urge the leadership to support those amendments so that legal permanent residents will not be treated so unfairly. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. If you don't mind touching base with Armando Chavez, who also works for Latino Caucus, he's right behind you.
Right, and
we can gather that
I've submitted
information.
all the material and the language to your staff as well.
Thank you so much. For the remainder of those that are giving public testimony, if you can speak under a minute, please, that'd be really appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity. My name is Sergio Sanchez, representing California Strawberry Commission. It's an agency established by statute. Over 400 producers and farmers belong to the commission. 70% of them are now Latinos. And 90% of the strawberries that are consumed by this country, by every family, comes from California. So we have a big stake in becoming a stakeholder and really pushing, just like the federal representatives are pushing the governor to stop the deportations. We got to push back and say you got to take care of immigration reform. Thank you for your leadership. We put together something that is called the Growing the American Dream, and it talks about the contributions of immigrants, not only from Europe, from Asia, but now from Mexico, and when it comes to about 70,000 jobs every single year. And just one last fact, each farm workers work for 1 year or for one season, feeds over 3,000 families and their share of strawberries. So I got 3 of those, but some additional ones for the rest of the caucus. Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you so much. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Sue Gilmore, Director of Adult Education for Sacramento City Unified School District and President-elect for the Council for Adult Education, California Council for Adult Education. And it's been alluded to a couple times today, both by presenters and by the caucus, that adult ed does need to have some dedicated funding if immigration reform goes through. I was around back in the late 80s when the amnesty went through, and we were opening classes all over the place. And right now, we don't have the money to hire the teachers to do it. So just keep that
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your testimony. Yes, sir.
Chad Silva, Latino Coalition for Health of California. We support the comments made by our friends at CPCA. We also want to remind folks that there will be 3 to 4 million folks who are going to remain uninsured, and that includes, to a significant extent, undocumented individuals. And it's unconscionable that those who contribute to the wealth of this state will not have adequate access to health care. So therefore, the conversation about comprehensive immigration reform has to include access to health services. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Julio Cesar Gonzalez. I will offer anecdotal and personal experience that I work on a regular basis with undocumented immigrants in the capacity that they require certain business documents to be documented. And in my experience over hundreds of cases of signing up individual documents, I want to attest to the fact that these folks who come here, they're attempting to play by the game. They want to have driver's licenses, and to the T, when I ask them for an individual social security number or an ITIN, they provide an ITIN when their social security number is not available to them. So I have yet to encounter a person who doesn't have an ITIN. These are persons who want to contribute, and I would like to offer that as my anecdotal experience. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
Good afternoon. My name is Sandra Vargas. On behalf of the California Catholic Conference, I'd like to thank you for hosting this informational hearing, which has offered a lot of very valuable data for us as well. As you know, the Catholic Church itself has had a long history in protecting the human rights and dignity of immigrants and workers, and we also, at the federal level, have been engaged. Our bishops are very much in support of comprehensive immigration reform that really does achieve or help meet the demands of the labor force, but also unite families and try to do this reform in the most humane possible way. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Any closing comments from members? Go ahead.
First of all, thank you for everybody for your patience, and I think it was an important issue. But I wanted to just agree with my colleague from San Bernardino, is that as the issue keeps moving forward, to keep building bridges between communities, really telling our country and California that this issue is not just for Latinos, but of all immigrant communities, and they're from all different backgrounds and all different colors. And I think that's a powerful message, because when we do that, we bridge all the communities together, that we should all be behind this and find that common ground. I know we weren't able to get into a lot more about what Presente.org does. My good colleague and former staffer for the Latino Caucus when he worked for Marco Antonio Farba, Arturo Carmona. But one thing that Manuel Perez and I have been talking about, how do we get the word out to our communities? It's been hard because there's so many moving pieces. It's so complex. It's changing as Congress, as session comes back. There's so many different pieces. And we've been struggling on how to inform our communities about all the different aspects, the good aspects, and then the ones that we're concerned about also. And I know Mr. Arajo has his radio program. That's an important way to get the word out to the Latino community. Presente.org, I think, is the more high-tech, the newer ways through social media and through their listserv, getting the word out to their members about the different pieces. But I think that's one of our struggles, is how do we keep getting that message out to our communities to weigh in, to have a stronger voice. We do have a voice, but how do we amplify that as strong as possible? And also that our everyday, hardworking citizens of our communities or residents of our communities have that opportunity to understand what is that immigration bill. It's a challenge for us. It's a challenge for us as Latino Caucus members. We think it's important that they have that information, and also that they know different ways that they can weigh in, key strategic ways that they can weigh in. But I'm glad we had this hearing here in Sacramento, but we hope to keep working together to get that word out and keep helping our community amplify their voice on this most critical human rights issue of our time.
Mr. Perez, may I just add that as a former publisher of a newspaper, we're called the voice for the voiceless, the voice of the voiceless, the Black Voice News. And that newspaper told the story. I think so many people are going high-tech that they forget that everybody's not online. Everybody can't afford to have internet in their house. But they can go the traditional way, and they do go the traditional way. And a lot of times people are forgetting the radio. They're forgetting the newspapers that are in our communities. And I know in San Bernardino, we have worked with the newspapers, even helping to start one Hispanic newspaper in our town. So that's something that I think when you start talking about how to get the word out, that's how you get the word out. You go the way that people are, where the people are now, rather than trying to just say, okay, well, everybody's going to get online, and we'll do it that way. Just had to add that.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Brown, as well as Mr. Alejo, for engaging with us in this very important discussion, and for your comments and your points, and also for being champions on behalf of immigration reform and diversity, for that matter, for the state of California. There's so much to discuss when it comes to this issue. Obviously, 3 hours, 4 hours is never enough, right? Even when we were putting together the agenda, I knew that we were going to go over the amount of time that we were allotted because of the fact that there's just too much to discuss. This discussion can take place over days, over weeks, over months, over years. And some of you have been in this discussion now for quite some time. But the whole purpose behind all this, at least for the Latino Caucus, was really to ascertain what the concerns, what the challenges are, as well as what have been the advancements at the federal level, and quite frankly, what is the Latino Caucus going to do about it, right? And so I think that from here, we're going to take all your testimony. We're going to have, obviously, a lively discussion within ourselves, within Latino Caucus. We'll also talk to other individuals, members of the Republican Party, members of other caucuses, to see if we can come up with a unified approach to really push the agenda. Quite frankly, I believe, like many of you, and I'm sure our friends here with me on the dais, believe that the state of California needs to be at the forefront and really push the agenda. And we heard from so many of you that perhaps this is what we have, and perhaps it's only going to be half of the individuals that can be eventually individuals that can gain citizenship, but what are we going to do about the other half? And perhaps that's where the state of California can come in and think about how we can do some work here legislatively if at the federal level not everyone is going to be supported in that way. Obviously, the issue of border security and the concern of the militarization of the border region does have an impact on our folks. Obviously, you are on the front lines, Mr. Morones, with Border Angels, and you see it on a daily basis. Perhaps we as a caucus need to take that suggestion back to our members and think about what that really means for us. And should we hold the line when it comes to that issue? And should we push our congressfolk, whether Republican or Democrat, and let them know that we just cannot accept that? Don't know yet. We have to really think through all that. Ultimately, this is a lively discussion that will take place within us for the next couple of weeks. We really appreciate the fact that Governor Brown came. I think that demonstrates the fact that he is in solidarity with us, and we will sit down with him eventually and debrief him, and then as well figure out what the next steps will be. There is discussion about a trip early October in which the Silicon Valley Leadership Group will be heading out that way. Luis Alejo is going to be going. I know a few others may be going. I may be going. But my thought with that is that if we go, or members go, that we need to have a unified message. And by that time, my hope is as well that we've already have discussed all these concerns, and we have an agenda that we can push as a Latino caucus, right? I also want to say thanks to our members that have been here and have had to leave, but Chajian, Hernandez, Garcia, Canela, Dolly, obviously Alejo, obviously Ms. Brown, who are still here, Gonzalez, Mr. Fong, Mr. Salas, and Mr. Calderon for being here and being part of this hearing. I also want to say thank you to our speaker, Mr. Perez, for allowing us to have this hearing. If it wasn't for him, we would not be able to have this hearing. As well, I want to thank the staff of the Latino Caucus for their great work. Always doing great work. Willie and Armando, thank you so much for your work, as well as Emmanuel, who works on my behalf as well with my office. And I want to thank all the members.
And he's a good interpreter, too.
And he's a great interpreter. But I just want to say thank you as well to all the staffers that work out of our offices. And last but not least, I also want to thank Angelica Salas, Executive Director, Coalition for Human and Immigrant Rights of Los Angeles, Chirla. I want to thank Arnaldo Torres, Immigration Analyst, Peter Shea, President for Center for Human Rights and Constitutional Law, Carl Guardino, President, CEO of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, Barry Bedwell, President, California Grape and Tree Fruit League, Mike Nguyen, President, CEO of the California Building Industry Association, Caitlin Vega, Legislative Advocate for California Labor Fed, Diana Telefson Torres, National Vice President for the UFW, Mike Garcia, President of the SCIU, Enrique Morones, who's got one last point he wants to make, President of Border Angels, Reshma Shamasunder, Executive Director, California Immigrant Policy Center, Arturo Carmona, muchas gracias for being here with us, President of Presente.org, Efrain Delgado, Dreamer Representative, thank you for your great work and for your words of wisdom, the California Dream Network, and as well Miguel Arrajo, old-time friend, thank you for your advocacy, President of Centro Azteca. And with that, I'll just go ahead and ask Enrique Morones to close it off with one last point that I think you wanted to make.
Just wanted to say, besides going to Washington, coming down to the border with us, let's see what that wall and the Border Patrol are doing before you make your decision.
Sure. I can appreciate that. You're not too far from me. I can come visit you anytime. With that, ladies and gentlemen, muchas gracias. There's more work to be done, and we'll follow up with all of you. And once again, thank you for being here.